What if the very essence of your body was governed by the whims of unseen spirits, and your health hinged on the alignment of celestial bodies? What if your bellyache was a sign of demonic possession or a mild case of witchcraft? In a world where leeches weren't just accessories but essential health care, and a sneeze could spark a full-blown exorcism, the medieval mind danced between reason and madness, leaving us with concepts so ludicrous they could make a modern-day conspiracy theorist blush. Consider this: you wake up one morning with a throbbing headache. A simple nuisance? Not in medieval times. You might find a priest, armed with holy water, shaking his head in grave concern. Your fate? A ritual to chase away the demons lurking in your skull, while your neighbor's advice could include wearing a tooth of a beaver for luck, because nothing says health like a rodent's dental relic. Every ailment was a mystery, every symptom a riddle wrapped in a layer of absurdity. Stomach pains? Clearly, your internal organs were at war, and what better way to negotiate peace than with a potion brewed from the feet of a toad? The medieval world thrived on the bizarre, spinning tales where the heart could be too full of blood or your liver was curse-ridden. Doctors, masters of the unknown, prescribed remedies that would make today's wellness influencers cringe. Picture a medieval apothecary, shelves brimming with jars of unidentifiable substances. A witch's brew here, a crushed insect there, every concoction promising salvation or doom. You've got the vapors, the merchant declares, remedying his hysteria with a whiff of lavender and a dash of arsenic. Was it magic? Medicine? Or sheer madness? But wait, there's more. The body was a battleground, each organ a warrior in the epic confrontation of health. Bloodletting became the preferred method of treatment, a relic of a time when letting life slip away was considered therapy. They believed that by draining the body of its vital fluids, they could restore balance. Today, we call that a bad idea, but back then, it was a Friday night special. And let's not forget that science of love. Who needed dating apps when you had a recipe for love potions? A dash of crushed unicorn horn, a sprinkle of cat fur, and voila! Instant attraction. These concoctions could summon lust or, if you were unlucky, a trip to the gallows. Romance was a game of chance, a thrilling gamble on the whims of fate and folly. What lies beneath the layers of these strange beliefs? A tapestry of human desperation, woven with threads of faith, superstition, and the absurdity of trying to make sense of an unpredictable world. What if every belief about the body was merely a reflection of our deepest fears and desires? As the clock ticks, the past beckons. Can you resist the pull of this chaotic enigma? Or will you surrender to the intoxicating madness of medieval absurdity? The answers await, and they're more outrageous than you could ever imagine. The moon hung low, a sliver of silver slicing through the thick fog that clung to the cobblestone streets of a town lost to time. I could hear the whispers of the restless, their secrets weaving through the chill of the night, as if the very air was choking on unspoken sorrows. There was a dampness in the atmosphere, a palpable tension, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. It was the kind of night where shadows danced just beyond the corner of your eye, taunting you with their presence. And there I was, standing at the edge of chaos, heart pounding like a drum, caught between the ephemeral world of dreams and the grim reality of flesh. In that moment, I saw her, Evelyn, face pale, eyes wild, a tempest brewing in her soul. She was a woman teetering on the edge of desperation, her breath quick and uneven, each exhale a silent scream echoing in the dark. Her fingers trembled, clutching at the frayed hem of her dress, as if it could anchor her in a world that felt as if it were unraveling. She was always a force of nature, but tonight, the storms within her were raging out of control, fueled by the red fury of choler that surged through her veins. It was more than just anger, it was a fire, raw and consuming, and I feared for her. "Do you feel it?" she gasped, the words tumbling from her lips like stones. "The world is tilted, and I am lost in its chaos." I wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the precipice, but instead, I felt the weight of my own turmoil pressing down on me like lead. My own soul was a roiling sea of black bile, the melancholia that clung to me like an unwanted shroud. I had always been the one to linger in the shadows, to find comfort in sorrow, but tonight, it felt like a curse. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel the purging bile rising in my throat as if to challenge the very essence of my existence. But then, there was Simon, my dear, foolish Simon, who stood between us, his laughter a brittle shield against the encroaching darkness. He was the embodiment of sanguine joy, yet even now, in the grip of our shared madness, I could see the cracks forming in his facade. The warmth of his spirit was dimming, flickering like a candle in a storm. "Come now, my friends," he called out, voice bright yet strained, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. "Let's not drown in our own shadows. Life is a feast, and we must eat." But there was no feasting for us, not when the spectres of our past loomed large, their laughter echoing like a taunt. I remembered the faces of the lost, those who had succumbed to the whims of fate, their dreams snuffed out like so many candles in a windstorm. I remembered the townsfolk, their hollow eyes reflecting the despair that had settled over our lives, as tangible as the fog that curled around us. The executions, the plagues, the whispers of betrayal, all the threads of our existence tangled together like an intricate tapestry of horror and absurdity. "Evelyn, you can't let it consume you." Simon's voice cracked, desperation threading through his words like veins through a heart. "We can't fall apart. Not now, not when the night is still young." But her wrath was unleashed, a torrent of emotion rising up to meet Simon's fragile optimism. "And what do you know of despair, Simon? You laugh in the face of death, yet your laughter is but a mask. You wear your sanguine facade like a jester's cap, while her voice trembled, filled with a deep sorrow that threatened to swallow her whole. I feel the weight of every sorrow that has ever existed." The tension hung in the air like an unspoken promise, a damning truth lingering just out of reach. I could see it in their eyes, the reflection of our shared humanity, raw and unfiltered. Each of us was a vessel of the four humors, churning and boiling beneath the surface, struggling for dominance. The choler of anger, the phlegm of indifference, the melancholy of despair, and the sanguine joy, all colliding in a chaotic ballet, each vying for control. I wanted to scream, to shake them from their stupor, to remind them of our shared struggle against the darkness. But words failed me, caught in my throat like a ghost from the past, haunting and relentless. The night stretched on, filled with a silence that seemed to swallow us whole, as if the universe itself held its breath in anticipation of our next move. "Remember the stories." I finally managed, the words tumbling out, raw and unfiltered. "The tales of the humors that guide our very existence. The balance we seek between joy and sorrow, love and hate, life and death. Are we not, in our own foolishness, merely puppets dancing on the strings of fate?" Evelyn's laughter rang out, a brittle sound that echoed through the night, and for a moment, I feared that she had cracked. "Puppets! Yes, that's what we are. But even puppets can cut their strings, can't they?" Her eyes glinted with a wild intensity, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. Simon stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace, but even he felt the tremors of unease that rippled through our hearts. "Evelyn, don't. You don't mean that. We need each other. You can't fight this alone." But the storm within her raged on, a tempest that refused to be quelled. I could see her grappling with the shadows that whispered sweet nothings of despair, tempting her to surrender. I wanted to scream, to shake her from this trance, but the words were caught in my throat, a bitter bile rising like the tide, threatening to drown us all. And as the moon hung heavy in the sky, the three of us stood together, entwined in our chaos, a trio of misfits caught in the web of our own existence. The world outside continued on, oblivious, as we wrestled with our demons, swaying beneath the weight of our desires and fears, caught in a dance as old as time itself. A clock chimed in the distance, and with each toll, I felt the seconds slipping away, the darkness creeping ever closer. The humors twisted around us, and I wondered, in that hollow space, if we were merely the reflections of a world that had long forgotten how to balance itself. Clocks ticked away the hours, shadows stretched long, and the night promised only more chaos, more sorrow, more life lived in the edge of despair. In that moment, we were alive, the chaos of our hearts beating in unison, a fragile harmony of the four humors, caught in the tension of a world that had forgotten the meaning of balance. And I knew, deep down, there was no end in sight, only a looping dance of emotion, drawing us ever closer to whatever would come next. A chill ran through the air, sharp as glass, and the rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the cobblestones like a heartbeat lost in a storm. I stood at the edge of a bustling marketplace, the scent of damp earth intermingling with the stench of unwashed bodies and rotting vegetables. It was chaos, vibrant and chaotic, but amidst the clamor, I felt a stillness creep in, a whispering dread. As a vendor yelled out his wares, a familiar figure caught my eye, Eliza, her wild curls clinging to her forehead, eyes wide with the panic of 1,000 thoughts swirling in her mind. I remember when she first spoke of the humors, her voice trembling as if uttering a dark incantation. "It's all in the blood, you know," she had said, clutching her stomach, her skin pale as winter's ghost. And there was Simon, always too jovial for his own good, a jester in the court of despair. He wove through the crowd, laughter spilling from his lips, masking the bitterness clawing at his insides. "Life is but a jest, my dear," he'd proclaim, as if the very notion of joy could drown out the demons lurking beneath his skin. But the truth was more sinister. Beneath that laughter lay a tempest, a brewing storm of black bile and yellow bile, the ancient beliefs that painted our very souls with strokes of illness and madness. I remember the night that changed everything, the moment when the humors clashed violently within us. It was a night heavy with portent, the moon shrouded by thick clouds, casting a pall over the city. Eliza had stumbled into my home, breathless and frantic, her fingers trembling as she recounted her latest affliction. "They say if the blood is too hot, it brings madness," she gasped, staring into the depths of my soul as if searching for an answer. "What if I am a vessel of chaos, a simmering pot waiting to boil over?" Her words clawed at my heart, and I could feel the weight of her fear wrapping around me like a vice. I wanted to reach out, to tell her she was more than the sum of her humors, but the truth hung in the air like the stench of decay. She was trapped, bound by the belief that our very essence was dictated by the fluids coursing through our veins. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, each a curse, each a chain that bound her to a fate she could hardly grasp. "Look at Simon," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "He laughs, but inside, he battles with the very shadow of despair. The bile within him fights against the mirth, and sometimes I wonder if he even knows which face to wear." There was something hauntingly beautiful about the irony. Simon, the clown, the harbinger of joy, was, in essence, a microcosm of our collective struggle. The laughter masked the truth, but the truth gnawed at us like a ravenous beast. It was a grotesque dance we performed, a ballet of illusions where the humors dictated our every move. The clock struck midnight, echoing through the empty streets like a death knell. The darkness pressed in, and we found ourselves drawn together, three souls entwined in a wretched tapestry of emotion and fear. The specter of our beliefs loomed large, shadows whispering secrets about our health and sanity. What if we were nothing more than the sum of our humors? What if Eliza's blood ran too hot, spiraling her into madness, while Simon's laughter was merely a mask for the yellow bile poisoning his soul? In that moment, the room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. I could feel the weight of their gazes upon me, a desperate plea for understanding. I remember their eyes, wide and pleading, and the realization struck me with the force of a thunderclap. Each of us was a prisoner in our narrative, shackled by beliefs as ancient as the stones beneath our feet. "Do you not see?" I implored, my voice trembling with urgency. "What if we are more than blood and bile? What if our hearts beat to a rhythm that defies these archaic bindings?" But the words hung in the air, fragile as glass, shattering against the walls of our fears. Eliza shook her head, panic etched on her face, the shadows deepening in her eyes. "But what if we're not? What if the humors control us, shape us into something unrecognizable?" Simon's laughter faltered, a flicker of something darker crossing his features. "Then let us embrace the chaos," he said quietly, a hint of defiance threading through his tone. "Let the humors swirl within us until we are nothing but a tempest of contradictions." The storm outside raged on, lightning crackling through the sky, illuminating the chaos of our fears, a reflection of the turmoil within. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Eliza clutched her stomach, a spasm of pain flickering across her face, and in that moment, I saw her for what she truly was, an embodiment of our collective struggle against the beliefs that sought to define us. "I remember the tales of old," I whispered, my heart racing. "How the ancients believed in the power of balance. What if we could find our own equilibrium? The words hung there, fragile yet hopeful, a lifeline amidst the storm. But the battle within raged on, a turbulent sea of doubt and conviction. The clock ticked on, each second echoing like the beat of a drum, pushing us towards a confrontation we could no longer avoid. And as the storm outside surged, inside us, the humors writhed and clashed, each pulse a reminder of our humanity, the blood that flowed through our veins, the phlegm that whispered of illness, the black bile that threatened to drown us in despair, and the yellow bile that ignited our passions. We were a tapestry of contradictions, each thread woven with fear and hope, laughter and sorrow, bound together by the belief that we were mere vessels for the ancient humors. With every heartbeat, I felt the weight of our struggles, the way the world pressed in, demanding definition while we yearned for liberation. The storm outside grew fiercer, lightning illuminating the darkness, revealing the flicker of truth amidst the chaos. There was no neat conclusion, only an endless confrontation with the beliefs that shaped our very existence, and as the world outside howled in fury, we stood together in defiance, ready to embrace the tumult within. The air was thick, almost choking, as the torches flickered against the cold stone walls, casting ghostly shadows that danced like lost souls. I could taste the dampness, the musty odor of rot and despair that had seeped into the very bones of this forsaken place. I stood there, heart racing, feeling the weight of history pressing down like an iron shroud. "Come closer," he whispered, voice like broken glass, shattering the silence. Brother Matthias, the keeper of forgotten lore, his face a roadmap of anguish. His fingers traced the jagged lines of an aged manuscript, yellowed with time. "You must see, you must understand." The parchment trembled in his hands, the ink a faded reminder of a world where anatomy was as much art as it was science. I remember the first time I encountered the grotesque illustrations, the twisted sinew, the rotting flesh. Back then, it was mere curiosity, a fascination with the macabre. But now, standing there, I felt the full weight of the grotesque reality. Here, within these walls, knowledge was both refuge and torture, a map leading nowhere but into the darkest corners of the soul. "Do you hear them?" Matthias's eyes widened, glistening like shards of ice. The whispers of the dead. It wasn't just madness in his voice, it was a sorrow that seeped into my bones. I felt it too, the echoes of those who had come before us. The air was alive with their lament, a mournful chorus rising from the shadows. His hand shook as he pointed to an illustration of a heart, intricately drawn but completely erroneous. "They thought the heart was the seat of emotion, of intellect," he said, a bitter laugh escaping his cracked lips. As if love and pain could be contained in such a fragile organ. His words were a knife, carving into my understanding of humanity, ripping apart the threads that bound love and loss. I glanced toward the door, feeling the pull of escape, but the fear of what lay beyond held me captive. The world outside was a tapestry of ignorance, plague-stricken streets, the dance of death in every shadow. Here, in this dismal sanctuary, there was truth, even if it was wrapped in fear. I was chained to the moment, a moth to a flickering flame, heart pounding in a rhythm of dread. "Look closer," he urged, voice trembling. "Each line tells a story." I leaned in, breath hitching, as the grotesque details overwhelmed me, the gnarled veins like snakes coiling around memories, the hollow eyes of those long gone gazing back at me with a hunger I couldn't comprehend. It was a reminder that beneath the skin, we are all just vessels, our secrets festering in the darkness. In the corner of the room, Alice stood, her presence both comforting and suffocating. "You can't let him drag you into this," she urged, her voice a fragile thread of sanity in the chaos. She was my anchor, yet I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. Each word felt like a plea, a desperate attempt to pull me back from the precipice of despair. But I was teetering, caught between the allure of knowledge and the dread of its implications. "I have to know," I breathed, the conviction clashing with the fear coiling in my gut. "What if the truths he holds can save us?" "They might destroy us instead," Alice replied, her face pale as moonlight. "This isn't just about understanding anatomy, it's about understanding ourselves. The deeper we dig, the more lost we become." And yet, there was a part of me that craved that abyss, the darkness that promised answers so tantalizingly close, yet frighteningly far. It was an addiction, a hunger that gnawed at my insides, beckoning me closer with every heartbeat. There, in that dim room, the clock struck midnight, the chime resonating with a finality that echoed in my chest. Time folded in on itself, seconds stretching into eternities. I could feel the air thickening with the burden of our choices, the weight of knowledge pressing down until it felt as if the walls might collapse under the strain. Tell me, I implored Matthias, desperation rising like bile. What do you know of the heart? His gaze shifted, a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, crossing his features. I know that it beats, he replied softly, his voice a whisper barely carried by the stifling air. And every beat carries a memory, a regret, a longing. But it's a map drawn in darkness, leading us to places we dare not tread. I clutched my chest, feeling the thrum of my own heart, the damned traitor. Each pulse resonated with the weight of my memories, intertwining with the histories buried deep in this stone labyrinth. I remembered love, betrayal, loss. The spectral hands of the past clawed at me, urging me to confront my demons, to reconcile the scars etched into my soul. It was then I noticed the shadows creeping closer, curling around my feet like ancient secrets clawing for freedom. My breath hitched, panic rising like bile in the back of my throat. There was something dark lurking at the edges of my vision, something that whispered of inevitability. "They're here," Alice gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to go. Now." But I stood frozen, caught in the web of what I had uncovered, my heart racing, desire and dread entwined in a deadly embrace. I remember stepping forward, drawn toward the abyss, all senses heightened. It was intoxicating, the high of knowledge laced with the poison of its consequences. The ground trembled beneath me, and I could feel the world shift, the balance teetering on the edge of revelation and ruin. "Stay with me," Alice cried, but the shadows were hungry, and I felt their pull, felt the weight of those who had come before me urging me to leap into the unknown. The walls whispered promises, each breath a thread unraveling my sanity. Brother Matthias's eyes glinted with something darker, a glimmer of understanding that sent shivers down my spine. "Sometimes," he murmured, "the map is a guide to nowhere." And as the shadows surged forward, I could only wonder if I had taken the first step toward enlightenment or doom. The heartbeat of the room quickened, and I knew it was too late to turn back. The darkness was calling, an invitation wrapped in dread and desire. And as I stood at the precipice, I couldn't help but feel that the most profound truths lay just beyond the veil, waiting to engulf me in a shroud of madness. The alley was dark, a stench of decay clinging to the cobblestones like a second skin. A flickering torch cast long shadows, stretching like desperate fingers across the walls of the cramped space, where the sound of a distant groan echoed, a spirit trapped between life and death. My heart raced as I pressed against the cold stone, every breath a reminder of the fragile line we tread on, the human body, so alive, so vulnerable, a ticking clock wound too tight. In this moment, Thomas knelt beside a body, his hand shaking as he teased the layers of cloth away from the lifeless form. His eyes, wide and haunted, were pools of desperation. He was a scholar cursed with understanding that threatened to unravel his sanity. The corpse, pale and withered, lay there like a tragic piece of artwork, a canvas smeared with the brushstrokes of ignorance. He muttered to himself, words tumbling out like broken glass. I remember when I thought I could understand it all. The heart, just a muscle, they said. But what if," he paused, staring into the hollow of the chest, as if expecting to find the answers nestled within. The heart was a riddle, a mysterious organ wrapped in the embrace of flesh, and here it lay, silent, a ghost of what it once was. "Thomas!" The voice cut through the oppressive air, Elena, his sister, her silhouette framed by the torchlight. She stepped forward, her eyes darting between the body and her brother, desperation clawing at her throat. "You can't. You shouldn't be here." But he couldn't help himself. He was a man fueled by a hunger for knowledge, an insatiable thirst that had led him down the path of dissection, of unearthing the very secrets of life. Yet here, in the damp alley, he felt the weight of his ignorance like a shroud. "Do you think they knew?" His voice trembled. "Do you think they understood the fragility of it all? How each heartbeat is a gift wrapped in flesh?" Elena stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for his shoulder. Thomas, they thought the heart was the seat of the soul. They believed in humors, in the balance of blood and bile. You're drowning in a sea of wrongness. But he couldn't let go. He couldn't relinquish the notion that the human body was a map, a labyrinth of mysteries waiting to be revealed. They bathed once a year. So yes, romance was earthy, he chuckled, but the humor fell flat in the oppressive air. The absurdity of it all twisted in his gut like a knife, as he lifted his gaze to meet hers. But what if this body holds the key? Elena's expression shifted, the tension palpable. She loved him fiercely, but she also knew the abyss that lived in his mind. You can't bring the dead back. You can't fix what's gone. A shadow flickered behind her, and she turned, her heart pounding, instinctively stepping closer to Thomas as if he were a shield. The alley felt alive, pregnant with whispers of the past, the agony of buried souls. We are not gods, she whispered, and in that moment, the air crackled, a reminder of the arrogance that once consumed the medical elite. Thomas, they thought the body was a joke. They treated wounds like curses, and here you are, trying to understand a world that was built on fallacies. The very walls seemed to lean in, pressing him, suffocating him. He wanted to scream, to shake the truths that had been laid bare before him, a mixture of fascination and horror. Knowledge was a double-edged sword, but he couldn't resist the pull. I remember when I was a child, each scrape and bruise felt like a harbinger of death. They said the blood was a river, but what if? Elena's breath hitched. What if? What if I could find the truth? He gestured wildly, the moonlight spilling through the narrow passage, illuminating the corpse as if it were a sacrificial offering. What if I could show them what the heart truly is? What if the essence of life is buried beneath layers of fear? What if the mysteries of our existence are not as terrifying as we think? Her eyes glimmered with tears, the weight of his obsession breaking through the fragile wall of her resolve. But Thomas, what if your quest only leads you to madness? To the very thing you seek to unravel? The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 dreams crumbling, the echo of ancient knowledge buried beneath centuries of superstition and fear. Shadows danced, and the air grew heavier, thick with the remnants of long-dead souls. You think you're different, don't you? She whispered. You think you can save the world. But look around, this is what they left behind. His heart ached, a tumultuous storm raging within him. But I must try. Must you? The doubt in her voice wrapped around them like a noose. What if the truth is that we are all just echoes, drowning in our desperation to be understood? He stepped back, the world closing in on him like a vice. I remember the dreams of dissection, of pulling apart the fabric of existence, but all I find is this void. In that moment, they stood on the precipice, both terrified and exhilarated, the alley a tomb of unresolved questions. The flickering torch cast shadows of uncertainty, each heartbeat a reminder that they were but mortals, grappling with the cosmic dance of life and death. Can we ever truly know? Elena's voice cracked, breaking the fragile silence. Perhaps knowing is not the answer, Thomas whispered, lost in the depths of his own mind. As the darkness wrapped around them, the past wove itself into the present, and the weight of their shared pain pulsed like a heartbeat, relentless. They were trapped, bound to the shadows of ignorance and the haunting spectre of what they could never comprehend. And there, amidst the darkness, the flicker of a torch, the echo of a groan, they lingered on the edge of understanding, lost in the labyrinth of human anatomy, haunted by the layers of their own existence. The sirens blared, a piercing wail slicing through the night like glass shattering against concrete. I stood at the edge, the asphalt under my feet warm from the day's heat, yet I felt nothing but cold dread seep into my bones. My heart raced, a chaotic drumbeat, a warning against the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, the kind that wrapped its icy fingers around your throat and squeezed until breathing felt like a luxury. Where is she? The desperation in my voice cracked like fragile glass, echoing against the desolation. I turned to Liam, his face illuminated by the flickering lights of the ambulance, eyes wild, searching, pleading, then shifting to the shadows behind me, where darkness seemed to swallow everything whole. I don't know, he whispered, his voice barely a breath, yet laden with a weight that threatened to pull us both into the abyss. I could see the tremor in his hands, the way his fingers danced nervously against the steering wheel of his car, clenching and unclenching, as if trying to muster the strength to face the inevitable. The clock ticked on the dashboard, each second a drumbeat echoing our dread. 1 second. 2. 3. And then the door swung open. A figure emerged, staggered, graceful yet broken, as if the universe had decided to carve her from starlight and grief. Claire. My heart plummeted into the void. She was pale, too pale, and terror flickered in her eyes like a dying flame. This was not the Claire who danced through life, who laughed and spun tales like children with dreams. This was a ghost, a fleeting shadow of what was once whole. Claire! I lunged forward, every nerve in my body screaming at me to reach her, to pull her back from whatever dark edge she teetered upon. I wanted to wrap her in the warmth of memories, to shield her from the cold reality that hung over us like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating. But she recoiled, as if my voice held a darkness of its own. No, don't. The panic in her voice sent a shiver down my spine, cutting deeper than the knife I felt twisting in my gut. You don't understand. The air thickened with tension, electric and suffocating. Liam's eyes darted between us, the weight of our shared history pressing down like the gravity of a dying star. He, too, had loved her once. In another world, under a different sky, we all had been so blissfully unaware of the chaos that would one day shatter our lives. I remember, I breathed, the memory flooding in, laughter, 3 friends sprawled on the grass, hearts unburdened by the weight of the world, chasing dreams under a sun that felt endless. I remember when we thought we were invincible. Claire's gaze softened for just a moment, a flicker of the girl I had known, then it hardened again, walls rising between us like ancient fortifications. Invincible doesn't exist, not anymore, she murmured, her voice brittle, cracking with the weight of grief. The heart, it doesn't know how to heal. A haunting truth. The heart, the center of emotion and health, pulsing with life yet so easily shattered. I felt my own thudding against my ribs, a reminder of both my existence and my fragility. Each beat was a tether to the present, yet it echoed the past, every laugh, every tear, every moment that had stitched our fates together and now threatened to unravel them. What happened, Claire? It slipped from my lips like a desperate prayer, a plea for clarity in the chaotic storm that raged around us. Her eyes turned vacant, staring into a realm I couldn't fathom. I lost someone who mattered, she whispered, the words dripping with grief, each syllable a knife twisting deeper into the wound of our reality. And now, everything feels empty. Liam took a step forward, though I could see the indecision etched across his face. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the specter of their shared past loomed large between us, an unhealed wound, festering, raw. You're not alone, Claire, he tried, but the sincerity in his voice felt as fragile as ice on a winter's thaw. No, you don't understand. It's not that simple. The walls began to close in, shadows swirling, remnants of memories that haunted the edges of her spirit. Every heartbeat is a reminder of the pain, an echo of loss that I can't escape. The sirens wailed again in the distance, a haunting melody that felt like a requiem for the dying fragments of our once vibrant lives. I felt the steadiness of my own heart falter, a crack in the facade of hope. We can help you, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue, a promise wrapped in desperation. We can face this together. But even as I spoke, I knew that the heart doesn't always listen to reason. It's a creature of instinct, of raw emotion, a tempest that rages and pulls us under, suffocating in the depths of sorrow and loss. The heart, it's a battlefield, I murmured, feeling it beat violently against my chest, echoing the chaos around us. As Claire's gaze met mine, I saw an abyss, an overwhelming darkness that threatened to swallow us whole, a universe where hope flickered like a dying star. The fear wrapped around me, suffocating, and I could feel my own heart racing alongside hers, both desperate for something we couldn't articulate. I'm so scared, she finally admitted, voice trembling like fragile glass. The raw vulnerability of her admission sliced through the air, each word a shard of glass falling into the void between us. And in that moment, we were stripped bare, our hearts laid open, pulsing with the rawness of life and grief, a connection forged in the crucible of shared pain. In that silence, the chaos faded, leaving only the thrum of life, the heartbeat of the night, the pulse of the city, and the overwhelming tide of emotion that bound us all together. The air crackled as if the cosmos itself held its breath, waiting, watching, ready to erupt. And as I looked into Claire's eyes, I understood, the heart is not simply a muscle, it is a vessel of dreams and despair, a center of emotion that can heal, yet remains a potent reminder of our vulnerabilities. We stood at the precipice, the shadows swirling around us, and I knew that we were on the brink of something monumental, a confrontation with the very essence of what it means to feel, to love, to lose. As the sirens faded and the darkness enveloped us, I felt the weight of our shared heartbeat, the promise that we would face this storm together, no matter what lay ahead. Because in the heart, amidst the chaos, we found the strength to endure. And within that strength, the faintest whisper of hope began to rise, fragile yet unyielding, an echo of life that refused to be silenced. The clock struck 2, its echo reverberating through the dimly lit cafe, where shadows danced on the walls like specters of despair. I had been sitting there for hours, nursing the dregs of a cold coffee, my heart thrumming a chaotic rhythm, as if in sync with the tick-tock of the ancient timepiece that seemed to mock my every breath. I remember the pulse of the city outside, cars screeching, laughter bubbling, a symphony of life I felt utterly detached from. My hands trembled as I clutched the chipped porcelain mug, sweat pooling in my palms, the steam rising like a ghost whispering secrets just out of reach. Maggie burst through the door, her entrance like a bolt of lightning, electrifying the stale air. I could see it in her eyes, the storm brewing within. Her heart wore the weight of the world, and I felt the gravity of her pain pulling me down. She was everything I wasn't, bold, fierce, and corrupted by the shadows of past loves. "You wouldn't believe what I found," she gasped, breathless and wild, her voice a mixture of vulnerability and defiance. "What's haunting you now?" I asked, half joking, half serious. I could see the remnants of her last heartbreak etched across her face, a ghost that wouldn't let her go. The way her lips trembled spoke volumes, whispering stories of betrayal and longing, of lovers that bled her heart dry with their careless abandon. "I thought I left it behind," she muttered, her eyes darting around, as if afraid the memories might materialize in the corners of the room. "But it's like my heart has a mind of its own, plotting my undoing." The truth of her words settled between us, heavy and suffocating. It's funny, isn't it? How we always think we can outrun our hearts, as if they aren't the very puppeteers of our existence. I could feel the ache in my own chest, a familiar pang that echoed her sentiment, reminding me of the lives tethered to that elusive organ. I remember the nights I lay awake, wrestling with demons that had taken residence in my ribcage. How do you fight something so profoundly entwined with your very being? Then, from the shadows, Kevin emerged, his disheveled hair and weary eyes a testament to his own battles. He was a ghost of his former self, weighed down by heartbreak and regret, and as he approached, I could see the shadows clinging to him like a shroud. "Did someone say heart?" he quipped, a forced grin plastered across his face, but his voice quaked, fragile, like glass. "Please, save the jokes for open mic night," Maggie shot back, but her tone was flat, tinged with worry. "This is serious." Kevin sank into the chair across from me, the air thickening with the weight of unspoken words. "It's not just about love, you know. It's everything," he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup as if searching for answers in the porcelain. "Our hearts, they hold our secrets, our fears, they're a compass in a world that has gone mad." A silence engulfed us, oppressive and palpable. I could hear the distant sirens wailing, a reminder that pain was all around us, a relentless tide that threatened to drown. "You think it's true?" I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That the heart is the seat of our emotions, our very existence." Maggie looked up, her eyes wide and fierce, the storm still swirling within. "Of course it is. It's more than just an organ, it's a testament to what we endure, to our capacity for joy and heartbreak. Our very essence is written in the beat of our hearts." I felt the truth of her words like a dagger, piercing through my resolve. Was it true? Did my heart remember moments I wished to forget? The laughter of a child, the warmth of a lover's embrace, the crushing weight of loss? Did it hold the keys to my sanity or madness? With every heartbeat, I remembered everything: the first love, the last goodbye, the ache of loneliness that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Kevin leaned in, his voice low and urgent. But what if our hearts betray us? What if they lead us to ruin? His breath came in quick gasps, panic sparking in his chest. I thought I was invincible once. That I could outsmart my emotions, manipulate them like a game of chess. But here I am, a pawn left on the board, discarded. Maggie arched an eyebrow, her gaze hardening. So what? We surrender. We let the heart dictate our every move. Maybe, he replied, a hint of defeat curling around his words. Maybe it's time to accept that the heart is not just a vessel for love but a battleground for despair. I shivered, the thought wrapping itself around me like a cold embrace. The heart, fragile yet fierce, a paradox that could bring both ecstasy and agony. I remembered those nights haunted by shadows, where the world faded into the background and all I could hear was the relentless thud of my own heart echoing, an ominous reminder of my own mortality. Maybe we're just ghosts, lingering in a world that no longer wants us, I said, my voice shaky. Maggie's expression softened, the storm in her eyes quieting for a moment. Or maybe we're just learning to live again, she whispered, and in her gaze, I saw the flicker of hope. The clock chimed again, the sound slicing through the tension. I could feel the pulse of the city outside, echoing the turmoil within us. Every heartbeat a reminder that we were alive, that we felt, that we loved and lost and had the capacity to heal or to break. The cafe around us faded into a blur, our world narrowing to the three of us, a nexus of hearts, broken yet beating. Every beat, I murmured, barely audible. Every breath. And as we sat in the echo of those words, the weight of the night settling around us, I realized we were caught in a cycle that wouldn't end. Time wrapped itself around our hearts, our emotions intertwining like vines, pulling us deeper into a web of uncertainty. The shadows lingered, thick and heavy, waiting for the next heartbeat, the next breath, the next revelation, whispering that the night was far from over. The blade glinted, a silvery promise in the dim light of the chamber. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs like a caged beast, every instinct screaming at me to flee. The scent of iron hung thick in the air, mingling with the musty odor of aged wood and something foul, something that spoke of desperation and decay. A muffled groan echoed from the darkened corner. I can't breathe, cried Agatha, her voice a mix of terror and resignation, words tumbling from her lips like autumn leaves caught in a relentless wind. I remember the day she first looked at me with those eyes, wide and pleading, the spark of life flickering like a dying candle. They say bloodletting is the cure, she'd whispered, her breath warm against my skin, for everything. But here we were, on the precipice of horror, and I was about to bear witness to the grotesque act of salvation. The healer, draped in shadowy robes, moved with an unsettling grace. He was a figure drawn from a nightmare, his hand steady and sure as they grasped the knife. Just a little more, he murmured, his voice a cold caress that sent shivers racing down my spine. He was a man of paradox, both savior and monster, his belief in bloodletting unwavering. I had only ever seen death in his eyes. No. Don't. Agatha's scream pierced the stillness, a raw, animalistic sound. I wanted to close my ears, to claw at my eyes, to erase the horror unfolding before me. But I stood frozen, riveted, as the blade plunged into her delicate skin, crimson spilling forth, a macabre offering to the gods of health. The blood flowed, a vivid stream that wound its way across the floor, pooling like a dark promise. I could feel it, the room pulsing with agony, echoing a truth so profound it threatened to consume me whole. I remember the stories whispered in hushed tones, tales of how bloodletting had been the panacea of the ages, the remedy for ailments that spanned from common cold to insanity. But was this salvation? Was this the cure for her frantic heart? The healer's eyes shone with fervor, blinding in their conviction, as though he alone held the key to life and death. And it was in that moment, as crimson dripped like an unholy rain, that I glimpsed the darkness within myself. I felt a rush of rage, a primal need to protect Agatha, to snatch her from the jaws of this twisted fate. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice trembling like a leaf in an autumn gale. But the words fell flat, as if the air itself conspired against me. "Trust the process," the healer said, his tone dripping with authority, as though he were a god dictating the fate of mortals. I could see the shadows dancing in his eyes, the shadows of doubt, of fear tucked away behind layers of blind faith. "This will save her." But save her from what? From the sickness of the body or the sickness of the soul? The question spiraled through my mind with a cruel twist, the answer eluding me like the vague memories of a dream. I thought of the times we laughed together, the way Agatha's laughter rang like bells in the quiet evenings, sweet and innocent. And now, here she was, writhing on the ground, a broken echo of herself. "Help her!" I begged, my voice thick with desperation, the words spilling forth like the blood pooling around us. "Help her now!" But the healer was lost in his ritual, a man possessed by the demons of his own making. I watched as Agatha's face contorted, the will to survive battling against the weight of the blade, her spirit flickering like a candle caught in a storm. How could the cure demand such a price? How could we sacrifice the very essence of life to reclaim health? This was madness, an absurd theatre playing out before my eyes. In the back of my mind, memories crashed like waves, shadows of laughter, fragments of joy. I remember the time we stole into the meadow beneath the stars, her eyes sparkling like the cosmos above. It felt like a lifetime ago, a fleeting moment before the world turned dark and guilty. "I'm scared," she had said, her breath trembling like a fragile thread. And in that memory, I found my resolve. I lunged forward, hands reaching for the healer, fingers grasping his robe, yanking him away from Agatha, whose body lay limp, a puppet with frayed strings. "Stop!" I shouted, the ferocity of my own voice shocking even me. "You're killing her!" The healer turned, eyes widening in disbelief, his conviction shattering like fragile glass. "You don't understand. It's the only way." But I could see the crack in his armor, the flicker of uncertainty, the fear of losing control. And then, in that moment of clarity, I realized, it wasn't just Agatha on the brink, it was all of us. We were bound by our beliefs, shackled to the traditions that had bled us dry. I felt the weight of history on my shoulders, the burden of generations that had come before us, all offering their lives to the altar of misguided faith. "Let her go," I demanded, the words burning in my throat, a fire ignited by desperation and love. "Let her go. We can find another way." Time hung suspended in the air, a taut thread ready to snap. The healer hesitated, eyes darting between me and Agatha, the choice weighing heavy upon him. Blood continued to trickle, a silent testimony to the violence woven into our beliefs. I could see it, the flickering light within Agatha fighting against the darkness, the spirit of a warrior unwilling to surrender. And as I knelt beside her, cradling her head in my hands, I could feel her warmth, the pulse of life coursing through her, fragile yet fierce. I remember, this wasn't the end. This was a turning point. In the depths of despair, we would find a way out of this grotesque web, a way that didn't involve sacrifice. We would write our own story, a story of healing, not just in body, but in spirit. The healer's breath hitched, the blade clattering to the floor, a symbol of surrender, of understanding. I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the weight of his beliefs crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was another way. And with that, the shadows in the room shifted, the air thick with the scent of possibility. As I held Agatha close, feeling her heart pounding against my palm, I knew our fight was far from over. It was just beginning, a battle against the darkness that had reigned for too long, a fight for healing in every sense of the word. I looked into Agatha's eyes, and I saw a spark ignite. The ritual was broken, the cycle shattered. In that moment, we were alive, tangled in the rawness of the world, yet free in our choice to redefine our fate. The echoes of bloodletting would haunt us, but they would not define us. The cure was love, fierce and unyielding, ready to conquer the ghosts of the past and pull us into the light. The room is charged, a thick, suffocating air wrapped around us like a shroud. I can taste the metallic tang of blood, fresh, potent, alive, wafting from the table where a body lies, pallid and unmoving. It feels wrong, yet the flickering shadows dancing on the walls whisper promises of relief. In the corner, a candle flickers, casting a trembling light over the scene, a desperate plea for healing or a harbinger of death. I remember when they told me that blood was life, a sacred river coursing through our veins. Today, that river is a poison, a tempest of sickness. Elena stands over him, her hands trembling, a delicate balance of fear and resolve etched across her pale face. She is a healer, a woman with the burden of knowing she may be the only hope for this broken man. Each breath she takes feels sharper than the last, slicing through the suffocating silence. I can see the way the shadows cling to her, how they whisper lies of grandeur, of wisdom in the ancient art of bloodletting. It's for his own good, she insists, her voice a fragile tremor, as if the very act of saying it might shatter the fragile glass of reality that surrounds us. The blade gleams on the table, a cruel sliver of silver caught in the light. I remember how I once marveled at the doctor's confidence, his gnarled hand steady as he rained down promises, an elixir of health from the very blood that pulses in our veins. Balance, he said. Too much blood is a curse, a harbinger of disease. He spoke with a fervor that drew me in, made me believe that to bleed was to cleanse, to purify. But as I watch Elena's hand hover above the man's wrist, I feel the weight of this twisted tradition pressing down on my chest, a dark truth threatening to suffocate. Just across the room, Samuel, a young apprentice with wild eyes, watches closely, his heart beating in time with the man's faltering pulse. He's torn between loyalty and dread, caught in the web of belief that has ensnared our society for centuries. He was once a boy of dreams, a child who laughed in the meadows, unaware of the darkness that lurked just beyond the horizon. Now, that innocence is a ghost, and he stands here, wondering if he will witness a miracle or a murder. What if it doesn't work, he whispers, voice quaking, as if the words themselves might summon an answer from the void. Elena's gaze sharpens, a flash of anger igniting behind her fear. It will work, she snaps, but the tremor in her voice betrays her. I see the glimmer of doubt in her eyes, the flicker of a candle about to be extinguished. The man's breath hitches, a ragged gasp that echoes through the chamber, a ghostly wail that rattles my bones. I remember my mother telling me tales of bloodletting as if they were bedtime stories, each one more gruesome than the last, yet laced with a sweetened promise of healing. It's the way of the world, she'd say, folding her hands in prayer as if to shield me from the horrors of truth. But what truth is it that we cling to? The belief that life can be siphoned off, that fortune can be extracted from the very essence of our being? I watch as Elena's hand, steady now, descends with deliberate slowness, the blade poised above fragile skin, the tension palpable, a taut string ready to snap. The air crackles, filled with the whispers of our forefathers who embraced bloodletting with fervor, believing it would rid them of the ills that plagued their souls. Balance, they would chant, a mantra that feels so distant now, so dangerously naive. Samuel steps closer, hands fisted at his sides, a boy on the brink of manhood, grappling with the specter of mortality looming before him. You can't just cut him open, he cries, and his voice rises, desperate, raw. The words reverberate in the charged silence, rippling through the air like a shockwave. You don't know what you're doing. The accusation hangs there, heavy, a stone thrown into a still pond, sending circles of chaos radiating outward. Elena flinches, but she steels herself, the fire in her eyes igniting. I do know, she replies, low and fierce. I've seen it work. I've seen lives saved. We can't turn our backs on the wisdom of generations. But even as she speaks, doubt drapes itself around her like a cloak, and I can see the shadows creeping into her resolve. I remember watching a man bleed out on the cobbled streets, the life pooling beneath him in crimson agony. The townsfolk gathered, their faces a mix of fascination and horror, as if witnessing the birth of a new reality. That day, the air was thick with the scent of iron, the cries of the bereaved mingling with the laughter of children, their innocence forever tainted by the iron fist of tradition. The man's breath rattles now, an echo of mortality that sends a shiver racing down my spine. Time slows, each heartbeat sharp and staccato, resonating like a drum, a countdown to a moment that feels both inevitable and horrific. What are we doing here? What have we chosen? Elena's hand trembles as the blade bites into skin. It's a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat caught between worlds, a paradox of healing and harm. Blood begins to flow, thick and dark, pooling like ink on parchment, staining the innocence of belief with its crimson hue. But within the act lies a paradox, a cruelty wrapped in compassion. We believe we can save him, but what if we condemn him? I remember the tales of the past where blood was the currency of life and death, a sacrificial offering to ancient gods who demanded suffering in exchange for salvation. And as the shadows deepen and the candle flickers, I am left with the chilling realization we stand at the precipice, our hands stained red, our hearts heavy with the weight of tradition, caught in a relentless cycle of faith and fear, forever chasing the specter of healing while the darkness waits, hungry and patient, in the corners of our souls. The room was drenched in shadows, the ticking clock a relentless heartbeat echoing through the silence. It was just past midnight, and outside, a storm raged, wind howling like a banshee, rattling the windows. Inside, Claire sat crumpled on the edge of her bed, her phone flickering with notifications, astrology app pings, each one a cold reminder of the chaos she felt swirling in her own life. Her heart raced, not from the caffeine she had chugged earlier that day, but from the weight of the stars looming above her, dictating her every move, her very existence. She was a mere puppet, dancing on strings woven from the cosmos. I remember when I believed in this, she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. The air thickened with desperation, the scent of burnt sage lingering from her last ritual, a futile attempt to clear the negativity that had taken root in her life. I remember the last time I felt whole. Her best friend, Sam, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with a mix of concern and exasperation. Sam was the skeptic, the one with feet firmly planted on the ground, while Claire floated in the airy realms of Mercury retrogrades and lunar eclipses. "You can't let this stuff control you, Claire," Sam said, voice steady yet tinged with urgency. "You're not a walking horoscope. You have a say in your life." But Claire's eyes were glassy, reflecting the glimmers of the storm outside. "What if the cosmos knows something I don't? What if my cancer isn't just bad luck, but written in the stars?" The words tumbled out, raw and jagged, as she clutched her side, heart clenching with the weight of her diagnosis. The doctors had been vague, their words heavy with jargon, an astronomical chart of its own, but Claire felt every fragment of their prognosis pierce through her like the sharpest of arrows. It was as if the universe had conspired against her, and each celestial event echoed in her body. The full moon that had risen 2 nights ago had sent her spiraling, her body reacting like a marionette, strings pulled taut with anxiety. "You know, they say the moon affects our emotions," Claire murmured, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers among the shadows. "What if I'm just a reflection of the chaos up there? What if I'm already too late?" Sam stepped closer, their eyes locking, the tension thick as molasses. "You're not too late, Claire. Fight this. You're more than your zodiac sign or your rising moon. You're a fighter, not a victim." The fire in Sam's voice flickered, igniting something within Claire, a fragile hope that threatened to shatter under the weight of reality. But just as quickly, the flicker dimmed. Claire's hands trembled, the phone slipping from her grasp, crashing to the floor. The sound ricocheted through the room, shattering the silence like glass. "What if the stars are telling me something I don't want to hear? What if," a gasp escaped her lips, the fear palpable, curling like smoke around her heart. The implications loomed, dark and ominous, a haunting specter taunting her from the edge of her consciousness. Outside, lightning illuminated the night, a blinding flash that seemed to penetrate Claire's very soul, and in that moment, she felt exposed, raw. It was as if the universe was pinning her to the ground, revealing every flaw, every scar. She was not just battling her illness, she was grappling with the cosmos itself, the grand narrative written in the stars that felt impossibly heavy, like a curse she couldn't shake off. "I don't want to be a victim of fate," Claire's voice cracked, conviction faltering like a candle flickering in the wind. "But what if it's true? What if I can't change what's written for me?" "Then change your perspective," Sam shot back, voice cutting through the tension. "Embrace your chart, yes, but don't let it define you. You are not just a chart, you are a story, a living, breathing testament to resilience." The word struck Claire, resonating somewhere deep within, a faint heartbeat of defiance against the oppressive weight of the stars. Yet, the storm outside grew fiercer, mirroring the turmoil inside. Wind howled through the cracks, a cacophony of chaos and confusion, mixing with Claire's racing thoughts. The distant rumble of thunder echoed her internal struggle, a battle between belief and disbelief, fate and free will. In the flickering light, shadows danced around them, and Claire shivered. "What if I become a ghost of my former self?" she whispered, the fear of losing herself, of being consumed by the darkness, clawing at her chest. "What if astrology is just a trap, luring me into despair?" The storm outside reached its crescendo, and for a heartbeat, everything paused, the world outside holding its breath, waiting. Then came a crash, a thunderclap so loud it rattled the very foundation of their lives, and Claire felt something within her break. It was the realization that she could either surrender to the cosmos or fight back with everything she had. "I choose to live," she finally said, voice barely a whisper, but with a fire that ignited something in Sam. "I'll rewrite my stars. I will carve my own path." The world around them swirled, the air electric with possibility, the storm a reminder of the chaos they could either embrace or battle against. The clock continued to tick, each second a heartbeat echoing in the silence. But within Claire, the battle raged on, and as she opened her heart to the possibility of hope, she felt the shadows begin to recede. The stars might hold sway over her life, but she was the one who would determine how she would face them, head held high, unyielding in the face of fate. And so, the storm raged outside, but inside, in that small, dimly lit room, a new story began to unfold, one filled with the tension of the unknown, the pulse of the cosmos, and the haunting whisper of what could be. The clock struck 3, the hour of shadows, where breath hangs heavy and silent like a whispered secret waiting to be uncovered. I stood in the darkened room, the moonlight seeping through the curtains, casting ethereal patterns on the floor. The air crackled with tension, a palpable stillness that felt as ancient as the stars themselves. It was a moment pregnant with anxiety, where time seemed to stretch, each second a lifetime wrapped in uncertainty. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside this room, we were all falling apart. I could hear her, Mara, pacing like a caged animal, her hands trembling as she clutched the worn edges of her star chart. Each dotted line, a lifeline, mapping out the cosmos that had conspired against her. "It's not just about the signs," she whispered, her voice quaking with an urgency that sent chills racing down my spine. It's my health. It's all connected." I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the raw panic that gripped her heart like a vice. She was a Cancer, ruled by the moon, and her body felt like a storm-tossed sea, never at peace, always restless. Then there was Isaac, the skeptic. Abrasive and sarcastic, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed like a fortress against the intangible. "You really think a bunch of stars have anything to do with your health?" His tone was mocking, an attempt to shield his vulnerability. Yet, even he couldn't hide the worry etched deep in the lines of his brow. He was a Virgo, the perfect blend of practicality and anxiety, and right now, those traits were battling within him. His fingernails dug into his skin, and I could see the tension coiling in his shoulders. "Look at me, I'm falling apart too," he muttered, half to himself, half to the void. "Maybe that's why you're so obsessed with control." Mara shot back, her voice a sharp blade slicing through the thick air. "You think you can outsmart the universe?" Each word dripped with emotion, the raw edges of their souls laid bare. I stood frozen, the weight of their conflict anchoring me to the spot, torn between the two of them, knowing they were both right, and both so wrong. The walls felt like they were closing in as the moon hung high, its light gleaming like a judgmental eye, watching, waiting. I remembered the nights I spent poring over astrological texts, the fluttering pages whispering secrets of the ancients, suggesting that every planetary alignment could hint at a deeper truth, a truth that could unravel the tapestry of one's health. But was it true? Could the cosmic dance above dictate the very essence of who we are? I shuddered, feeling the weight of it all pressing down, the uncertainty mingling with the air I breathed. I remember, Mara's voice broke through my thoughts, fragile as glass but laced with an unyielding strength. I remember the day the doctor said the tumor was linked to my astrological chart. He chuckled, said it was a joke. But these patterns, they haunt me. The moon rules my emotions, and every full moon, I feel it, the pull, the surge, the pain. A tear glistened in her eye, a reflection of the tempest within. Mara was a woman of contradictions, fierce yet fragile, a heart beating wildly against the constraints of her sign. She had always been the caretaker, the nurturer, but now, in her vulnerability, she felt like a ghost of herself, haunted by the celestial forces that seemed to conspire against her very being. "Listen," Isaac said, his voice dropping an octave, suddenly serious. "Maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe it's just you, not the stars." But as he spoke, I saw the flicker of doubt in his own eyes, a recognition of the astrology that loomed larger than life, echoing through the alleyways of his mind. The irony dripped from his words like an oil slick, a desperate attempt to protect himself from the chaos of the unknown. "Or maybe," Imara replied, her voice steadying, "it's the way the universe reflects our struggles. The planets don't dictate, they reveal." Each syllable struck the air, a thunderclap of realization that reverberated around us. I felt it, the truth of her words, a whisper of wisdom tangled in the cacophony of human emotion. The room pulsed with a heartbeat, an echo of fate and frustration twisting together like vines around a crumbling pillar. The walls seemed to breathe with us, the shadows dancing as if absorbing our pain. I could almost hear the ticking of a cosmic clock, each tick a reminder of the relentless march of time, of the choices we were forced to confront. And in that moment, I couldn't tell where my own fears began and theirs ended. I, too, felt the planet shifting, the invisible forces that tugged at my own frail body. I remembered sleepless nights, a churning stomach, anxious thoughts that spiraled like galaxies spinning out of control. The astrological signs felt like an ancient prophecy, a madman's riddle that threatened to consume us whole. Mara's hand reached out, trembling but steady, bridging the distance between us. "What if we let go just this once?" she breathed, her eyes a tempest of hope and despair. "What if we stopped fighting and listened to what our signs are telling us?" The vulnerability in her voice pierced through the tension, a simple question laden with the weight of the universe. Isaac's facade cracked, just for a moment, and I saw the flicker of vulnerability that lay beneath. His heart was a fortress, but even the strongest walls could crumble. "What if," he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. The clock continued to tick, the shadows danced, and I felt the air shift, heavy with the promise of revelation, the impending confrontation of our fears, doubts, and desires. We stood on the precipice of something profound, something cosmic, where astrological signs and planetary alignments danced around us like specters, challenging our understanding of health, our bodies, and the very fabric of our existence. In that flickering moment, we were bound together by the threads of our own stories, each of us a constellation, a mirror reflecting the chaos of the cosmos and the fragility of our humanity. And as we took a breath, it felt as though the universe held its breath with us, suspending time, suspended in the mystery that lay ahead. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing like distant thunder, vibrating through the empty streets. A woman stumbled down the alley, breath hitching in her throat. Lila could taste the salt of her own sweat mingling with the damp earth beneath her feet. She felt it creeping up her spine, the weight of a curse she could not see but could feel, like cold fingers wrapping around her throat. Shadows danced like specters, taunting her, whispering secrets too dark to grasp. She could hear them, the words clawing at her sanity, which cursed, unholy. Her hands trembled as she pulled a tattered piece of parchment from her pocket, ink running in the moonlight. The spell scrawled there was both a promise and a threat. She thought of her brother, Tobias, lying motionless on the ground, an empty shell of the vibrant boy who had once chased fireflies under the fading sun. The healer's words echoed in her mind, a haunting refrain, "He is marked. Cursed by witchcraft." "I remember," she whispered, as if the darkness might relent if she recited the truth. "I remember when laughter filled our home, when stories wrapped around us like a warm blanket." Lila's heart sank as the memory crushed her, heavy and unyielding. But that was before the woods, before I ventured too far. In the stillness, her thoughts twisted, weaving through time like strands of a fragile web. she had sought answers, drawn by the shimmering allure of magic, fascinated by the tales of witches who could bend fate to their will. But she hadn't anticipated the price: her brother's life, tethered to her curiosity. A life extinguished by her folly. Crouching in the shadows, she could almost feel the presence of the witch, an ancient being cloaked in mystery and malice. Was it true what they whispered? That she fed on the pain and sorrow of others? The thought made Lila shudder. "I will not let him die," she vowed, resolute yet terrified, clutching the parchment tight as if it held the key to salvation. Tobias's laughter echoed in the recesses of her mind, a haunting melody. She had watched him grow frail, each day a struggle against the unseen enemy lurking inside him. She closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength. "I will find you, witch." The air crackled with her desperation, a raw emotion that pulsed like a heartbeat. And there he was, her brother, lost in the labyrinth of shadows, a flicker of light in the enveloping darkness. "Lila," he called, his voice a ghostly whisper, laced with both longing and fear. "Don't leave me." Each syllable sent a shiver racing down her spine, a knife twisting in her gut. She had to save him. But deep down, guilt gnawed at her, a relentless beast. "What if I am the curse?" she thought, the words spiraling through her mind. "What if my search for answers has only cursed him further?" She bit her lip, a taste of copper rising in her mouth. The shadows thickened around her, and the air grew stifling, like a noose tightening slowly. Then she saw her, an ethereal figure emerging from the darkness, skin pale as moonlight, eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. The witch stood there, a spectre of elegance and menace, as if she had stepped from a dream or a nightmare. "Did you summon me, dear child?" Her voice was a silken caress, laced with danger. "I felt your heart, so filled with sorrow." Lila's pulse quickened, terror and defiance battling within her. "You took my brother," she shouted, each word tearing from her throat, raw and desperate. "I want him back." The witch laughed softly, a sound that sent chills racing through Lila's veins. "Did I? Or did you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like smoke curling around a flame. Lila grasped for answers, for clarity, but the witch's gaze pierced her soul, unraveling the threads of her resolve. "I remember," Lila stammered, "I remember my mother's words. Witchcraft is a reflection of the heart." She could feel the weight of the curse, a mirror held up to her own flaws. "I am afraid. I don't wish to wield the darkness." The witch tilted her head, a serpent watching its prey. Fear is a powerful tool. But it is also a cage." The shadows danced around her, trembling at her command. "You seek to cure the body, yet you must first confront the spirit." Lila's heart raced as the realization washed over her. "I cannot save him without saving myself." The words struck like lightning, illuminating the dark corners of her mind. She had to confront the truth that she had drawn this darkness into their lives, like a moth to a flame. With every heartbeat, the confrontation swelled, an inexplicable tension crackling in the air. The witch stepped closer, her presence both a balm and a curse. "What will you give for your brother's life?" "I will give anything," Lila cried, a fervent plea that echoed through the night, reverberating against the walls of her own guilt. "What must I do?" "Sacrifice," the witch whispered, the word a blade slicing through the silence. "You must face the shadows within you. The truth of your heart." In that moment, Lila felt the ground tremble beneath her, the very fabric of her being shaking loose. She looked into the witch's eyes and saw the reflection of her own fear mirrored back at her, fear of failure, fear of love, fear of the unknown. Tobias's whisper lingered in the air, a fragile thread tying her to the past and the present. "Save me, Lila." "I will," she vowed, voice trembling with raw emotion. "I will face the darkness." The witch smiled, and in that smile, Lila could see the promise of pain and redemption, the tangled web of curses and cures, the eternal dance of life and death. As the shadows closed in, she felt the weight of the world pressing against her chest, a fierce urgency igniting her spirit anew. In that moment of reckoning, the air thickened with tension, and the night held its breath, waiting for the resolution that was both inevitable and terrifying. The clock continued to tick, but time felt suspended, a dark abyss pulling them further into the unknown. The curse was alive, and so was the hope of cure, two sides of the same heart. And thus, the story spiraled on, the dance of witchcraft and the body, of curses and cures, intertwining like branches in a storm, forever reaching, forever yearning, forever lost in the shadows of the night. The moon hung low, a gnarled finger pointing to the village square, where shadows writhed like embers in the dark. A sickly sweet scent filled the air, burnt herbs mingled with the acrid tang of fear. I stood there, heart pounding, as Eliza knelt before the crude altar of stone, her fingers trembling over a tattered doll, its button eyes gleaming under the pale light. The villagers whispered behind me, their breaths quickening like a flock of startled birds. Was it true what they said? That witchcraft could twist the body as surely as it could warp the mind? That it could send a once healthy man sprawling into the arms of sickness, clutching at his chest as if the very air was poison? Shut the door! Eliza's voice cracked, each word a desperate plea, barely heard over the rising wail of the wind. I remembered her laughter once, rolling like a summer breeze. Now, it was lost, buried under an avalanche of dread. They called her a witch, though all she had ever wanted was to heal. I could see the shadows of uncertainty dancing in her eyes. Did she believe in the power of her rituals, or was she merely grasping at straws, hoping the weight of centuries would pull her back from the brink of despair? I stood frozen, my own memories swirling around me. My brother, once the epitome of strength, now lay pale and trembling, consumed by an unseen affliction. The whispers of witchcraft spun tales of curses and malice, a darkness that crept into our lives, stealing laughter, stealing breath. I could not shake the image of him, clutching his chest, eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. The villagers had gathered, forming a circle around me, judges in a trial without law, and I felt the weight of their gaze, each pair of eyes a dagger, each whispered word a noose around my brother's neck. Eliza raised the doll, her hand steadying as though cradling a fragile secret, and the flickering flame of the altar caught the strands of her dark hair, turning them to silver. I remember, she began, her voice a haunting echo. I remember when the sickness came, how the shadows whispered beneath my bed, how the walls seemed to breathe. I caught the disbelief twisting in the mouths of the crowd, the way they shifted, as if the very ground was swallowing them whole. She was not just a witch, she was a vessel of something ancient, something primal. I remember, she continued, and I could see the memories coiling around her like vines, wrapping tighter, tighter, until I feared she might snap. The old woman who taught me the songs and the chants. How to weave the herbs into potions, how to break the hold of darkness with a single word. Her eyes darted to the crowd, searching for understanding, for acceptance. But they were not here for healing. They were here for blood. I felt a surge of anger, a desperate need to protect her, to shield her from the frigid claws of ignorance. But I was powerless, a mere spectator in this theater of despair. "Eliza!" I called, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You can't let them take you. You're not a witch, you're a healer." The words hung heavy in the air, and I could see it then, the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the way hope danced just out of reach. But the chant began, low and resonant, like the thrum of a funeral bell. The villagers joined in, their voices a ghostly choir summoning the spectre of fear. "Burn the witch! Burn the sickness!" Each repetition drove a wedge deeper into my heart. I saw the fear etched into their faces, their own bodies trembling at the thought of what lay beyond, what lay in the dark corners of their souls. They feared the unknown, and so they chased after Eliza, the embodiment of their dread. I remember, her voice trembled, the chant falling silent as she locked eyes with me, a flicker of defiance igniting within her. I remember the night the stars turned black, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. Her fingers brushed the doll, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. There are forces at play, unseen, that gnaw at our flesh, twist our minds. I can fight them. I have to fight them. The air crackled with tension, and I could feel the weight of her desperation pressing against my chest. The scent of burnt herbs grew stronger, mingling with the palpable fear. I wanted to scream, to pull her back, but the darkness surged forward, swallowing us whole. "What if we're wrong?" I whispered, the question slipping from my lips like a prayer. What if this is just a sickness? What if it's not witchcraft at all? Eliza stepped forward, her voice a haunting melody against the cacophony. If I can save one life, if I can break the curse. Her words hung there, suspended in the heavy air, and I could see the ghosts of her past looming behind her, whispering secrets, promises of power and despair. I won't let fear devour us. A flicker of light ignited in those dark eyes, and I knew then I had to believe in her. Behind me, the villagers surged forward, a wave of rage and confusion, and I felt the tremor of their fear shake the very bones of the earth. I could see the edges of madness creeping in, the thin line between reality and the supernatural blurring like shadows in the dim light. They believed Eliza was the source of their suffering, and with each heartbeat, the tension twisted tighter, a noose around our fates. Help me, she begged, raw and trembling, and I could feel the pull of her desperation, a gravitational force that drew me closer. Help me show them the truth. The night was thick with uncertainty, the weight of suspicion pressing heavy on my shoulders. I gazed into her pleading eyes, the flicker of hope intertwining with fear, and a spark ignited in my heart. In that moment, we were not just fighting against the villagers, we were battling the very essence of belief, the fragile line between witchcraft and medicine, the raw nerve of human fear. I reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine, and I knew this was only the beginning. The rituals, the chants, the darkness that lay in wait, none of it would simply fade away. Our destinies were bound, entwined like the roots of an ancient tree. We were on the brink of something profound, something terrible. The villagers surged and pulled, but we stood resolute, the flickering flame of the altar igniting our resolve. I remembered my brother's face, his laughter, the way he used to dance under the stars, and my heart clenched with the weight of what was at stake. Together, I whispered, a promise made against the rising tide of fear. Together, she echoed, and in that echo, I felt the pulse of our defiance, a heartbeat against the encroaching darkness. The night was alive, a coiling serpent of uncertainty, and we were ready to confront whatever horrors awaited us. The ritual had begun, the air thick with magic and dread, and as I closed my eyes, I could feel the world around us shift, the boundaries of belief bending and twisting in ways we could never have imagined. And so we stood, on the edge of the abyss, facing a darkness that promised to consume us, reaching out for the flickering light of hope that glimmered just beyond the veil. Each breath echoed the urgency of our fight, a sacred vow that we would not go quietly into the night. The shadows were deep, but so was our resolve. This was not the end, it was merely the beginning. The night was thick with dread. Stars blinked in their distant constellations, weaving tales of ancient gods and forgotten sins, while a lone figure staggered through the cobbled streets, clutching their stomach. The air was heavy, saturated with the coppery scent of fear and the bitter aftertaste of regret. Ilara, a young woman with eyes the color of storm clouds, gasped for breath, each inhale jagged and desperate. She had known her fate before the sickness claimed her, whispers in the shadows, warnings from the village seer, the echoes of her mother's voice, Ilara, you must repent. There it was again, a knot in her chest, a tightening, a warning from deep within. She stumbled, collapsing against the cool stone of a wall, retching into the darkness. It came in waves, a violent surge that felt like judgment itself, clawing at the remnants of her soul. The moon hung high, casting ghostly silhouettes that danced around her, taunting her with their silent laughter. Divine punishment, they seemed to whisper, their lips curling into a smirk. I remember, she gasped, memories flooding her mind like a fever dream. I remember the markets, the laughter, the way I lived without fear, without thought. Each recollection felt like a stab, a reminder of the joy that had been snatched away, replaced with this grotesque punishment. The villagers now avoided her gaze, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and horror. They believed, truly believed, that sickness was a sign of God's wrath, a consequence of sin. But what was her sin? To crave freedom? To defy the chains of expectation? She thought of Marcus, whose laughter once rang like church bells, bright and clear. The way he looked at her, like she was a wildflower, a beautiful anomaly in a world of conformity. Yet even he had pulled away, his faith anchoring him to the beliefs of their people. Ilara, it's for your own good, he'd said, the weight of duty heavy on his shoulders, a noose tightening around their love. Is this what you wanted, Marcus? She whispered to the void, her voice breaking, a fragile thing. Did you wish for me to suffer? The shadows thickened, swirling with her despair, and in the distance, a church bell tolled, each chime a reminder of the judgment awaiting her. As she stood, weakened by the battle within, the world around her transformed into a stage of divine absurdity. The townsfolk, with their heads bowed and their hands clasped in prayer, acted as if they were actors in a tragic play, reciting lines written eons ago. God punishes the wicked, they murmured. The sick deserve their fate. But sickness was a fickle thing, wasn't it? Like a dice game played by capricious gods, it struck the innocent and guilty alike. She remembered the day the fever had come. It was almost a year ago, when the sun had been shining, and the smell of fresh bread had wafted through her window. It's just a cold, she had joked, dismissing the creeping chills. But then it escalated, a spiraling descent into hell. She had watched herself wither, seen her skin turn pale, her laughter die. She was the embodiment of shame, a living testament to divine punishment. Forgive me, she whispered to the wind, her heart racing, pounding like a drum. But I am more than this illness. Her breath hitched, a fresh wave of bile rising. I am more than a reflection of someone's belief. And then there was Roderick, the town's butcher, a man whose hands were stained with blood, both from his trade and from the sins he concealed. He was a tower of muscle, a fortress of grit, but beneath those layers lay a heart bruised and battered. He glanced at Ilara from his shop, the windows fogged with the warmth of his business, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Roderick, she called, her voice raw. Help me. He hesitated, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. It's not safe, Ilara, he replied, his voice a low rumble. People are watching. They will think you are a curse. A curse? The word hung between them, a chasm wide and dark. Is that what you believe? That I deserve this? I don't believe in sin, Ilara, he said, his fists clenching at his sides, a wall of conflict in front of her. I believe in survival. But survival often came at a price. She watched as he turned away, his resolve crumbling beneath the weight of what the world demanded. She was a pariah, a vessel of the divine's wrath, and he was a dreamer caught in the spinning gears of a merciless machine. Around them, the townsfolk marched, their heads bowed in a ritualistic display of devotion, their chants rising like smoke into the night sky. Repent! Repent, they cried, their voices a cacophony of fear. The sick are the damned. Ilara felt a flicker of anger ignite within her, a roaring flame against the chill of despair. I am not damned. The words ripped from her throat, raw and primal. I am alive. Roderick glanced back, his face a mask of turmoil, and in that instant, she saw the cracks in his armor. What if you are a warning? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What if your sickness is a sign to the rest of us? What if it isn't? She shouted, each word a challenge to the universe, each heartbeat a declaration of her existence. What if I am simply me? A woman lost in a world that demands sacrifice. In that moment, a ripple of tension coursed through the crowd. They paused, eyes flickering toward Ilara, faces pale and horrified. But she stood firm, rooted in her truth, her breath a steady rhythm against the storm. And as the weight of their judgment pressed down on her, she felt something shift, a crack in the facade of their beliefs. The night stretched before them, a canvas of shadows and light, and in that space, she found a glimmer of hope, a rebellion against the chains of divine punishment. I remember, she murmured, the words echoing in the silence. I remember who I am. And with that, the darkness deepened, twisting the air around them, wrapping them in an embrace that was both tender and terrifying. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of their world, a clash between the fear of the unknown and the acceptance of truth. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to break the cycle, to scream against the silence and reclaim her existence. The church bells tolled, each chime a heavy sigh that echoed through the cobbled streets, reverberating against the darkened stone of the time-worn buildings. It was a sound that clawed at the gut, an omen that whispered of reckoning, and in that moment, a shriek pierced the air, a woman's voice, raw and desperate, fracturing like glass. I was there, caught in the oily haze of smoke and fear, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs meant to ward off the very sickness that ravaged our town. I remember how she stumbled from the shadows, eyes wide with terror, her hands clutching at her chest as if to keep her heart from spilling out. Her name was Eliza, a widow, a mother, a believer. They said her son was sick, that a fever had slithered through their home like a thief in the night, stealing away breath and laughter. But the whispers around town suggested it was something more sinister, an affliction bestowed upon her for sins unconfessed, for a life lived in the shadow of her late husband's betrayal. God is punishing me, she screamed, her voice cracking, as if the very air could shatter under the weight of her despair. In that moment, the belief settled in my bones, a chill creeping through me as I recalled my own ghosts, my father, once a priest, now lost to the mercy of his own faith, ravaged by a sickness that left him breathless and broken. He had muttered prayers that turned to curses, each syllable a weight, dragging him deeper into the abyss of his own guilt. I stood frozen, a witness to her unraveling, a voyeur to her pain. The townsfolk gathered, their faces masks of grim acceptance, each one of them holding their own secrets like a noose around their necks. Benjamin, the butcher, who'd been seen flirting with a young girl just before the fever struck. He looked away, ashamed, as if the very act of breathing near Eliza would invite the same judgment upon him. We all carried our sins like stones in our pockets, heavy and suffocating. I remember, I whispered to myself, the day my father fell ill. It was summer then, the sun casting a cruel light on the fragile petals of the tulips that danced in the breeze. I had been playing, unaware of the storm brewing within the walls of our home, the tempest of guilt and retribution that hung over my father's head like a blade. I remember the way he clutched his chest, how each cough echoed through the hall like the tolling of a distant bell, a funeral march for a man who had once held the world in his hands. Eliza's cries twisted into the night, the pain palpable, a dark spectre that loomed over us all. The fever that claimed her son was an echo of our collective sins, the judgment of a God too far removed to intervene. My heart raced, a clock gone awry, ticking down to oblivion. Each heartbeat was a reminder of the fragility of life, of how swiftly joy could turn to ash, of how easily love could be snuffed out by the flames of divine retribution. I remember the stories we told ourselves, the tale spun in the flickering light of the tavern, how the plague was not merely a sickness but a divine message, a call to repent. You see, I had often joked, sickness is just God's way of reminding us to keep our laundry clean and our souls even cleaner. But standing there, watching Eliza, I felt the weight of my words turn to stone. What if our laughter had been a shield, a fragile illusion against the harsh truth? I could see her son's body, a small, still figure wrapped in a tattered blanket, untouched by the world, waiting for judgment. The townsfolk murmured prayers that felt like incantations, their voices rising and falling like the tide, an offering to a deity who seemed to revel in our suffering. It was then that I saw the flicker of doubt in Benjamin's eyes as he turned away, his own sins clawing at him like a ravenous beast. Did he believe himself above judgment, above punishment? Why do we let fear dictate our faith? I wanted to scream, but all that escaped was a choked whisper, swallowed by the night. Eliza was collapsing now, her knees buckling beneath the weight of her grief, the reality of her punishment crashing down around her like the waves against the cliffside. I wanted to reach out, to pull her back from the edge, but the chasm between us felt insurmountable, filled with the echoes of our failures, our misdeeds woven into the very fabric of our existence. I remember the dreams, I murmured, feeling the words tumble from my lips like errant raindrops. The ones that came as I lay beside him, the whispers of angels and demons dancing in the ether. They warned of reckoning, of a divine hand that would not hesitate to strike down those unworthy. But as Eliza's cries faded into the night, I felt a flicker of rebellion ignite within me. No longer could I stand idly by, a witness to our collective penance. The weight of sin was a heavy cloak, but I would not let it suffocate me. I would fight against the belief that illness was divine retribution. I would unshackle myself from the chains of guilt that bound me. Yet, even as the resolve hardened in my heart, I knew there would be no easy answers. The shadows wrapped around us, thick and unyielding, a reminder that our sins were not just whispers in the dark but the very fabric of our lives. And as the church bells rang out once more, I felt the cold fingers of fate curling around my throat, tightening with each heartbeat, a reminder that we were all caught in the web of righteousness and retribution, each of us teetering on the brink of our own damnation. As I stood there, trembling on the precipice of belief and doubt, the world around me faded into an eerie silence, a void pregnant with tension, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I knew the confrontation was coming, inevitable and cruel. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could almost taste it, bitter as bile, sweet as hope. And in that moment, I understood the abyss that lay before us, a churning darkness that promised either redemption or ruin. The lines had blurred, and as the night deepened, so did my resolve. The air was thick with desperation, a palpable weight that clung to the skin like a shroud. In a dimly lit chapel, flickering candles cast macabre shadows on the walls, twisting and writhing like the souls of the forsaken. I stood at the altar, heart racing, the smell of incense mingling with something far more sinister, a tinge of decay that whispered of lives lost and hopes shattered. I remember the moment when Miriam collapsed, as if the very ground beneath her had turned to ash. Her body, once a testament to vibrant life, now lay crumpled like a forgotten doll. Frantic sobs echoed through the small room, rising and falling like the tide of a relentless ocean. I could hardly breathe, the weight of loss circling me, tightening its grip. That was when Thomas stepped forward, his eyes wide, betraying a storm of emotions. He was a man of faith, yet doubt danced behind his heavy brows. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the way his hands trembled as they clasped the frayed edges of a weathered relic, a small piece of wood, claimed to be from the cross itself. "I can't lose her," he whispered, voice cracking like the frail branches of winter trees. "Not after everything. This has to mean something." And in that moment, I felt the weight of the world settle on my shoulders. The relic pulsed with a strange energy, a heartbeat of its own, echoing with promises of salvation and whispered lies. It was just a piece of wood, yet here we were, pouring our souls into it, desperately seeking the divine in a world that had turned its back on us. The shadows flickered, as if the chapel itself breathed in tandem with our hopes and fears. Miriam's breath came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle, a plea to the heavens. I could see the life slipping through her fingers, like sand in an hourglass, each grain a memory lost, a moment slipping away into the void. I remember the way her eyes fluttered, searching, pleading for something, anything, to pull her from the brink. In that instant, I felt the aching pull of desperation deep in my gut. The chapel, with its cracked stone walls and dust-laden pews, became a prison, suffocating in its silence. I could hear the clock ticking, each second a cruel reminder, echoing louder and louder until it drowned out the very sound of my thoughts. Time was both friend and foe, a double-edged sword slashing through the fabric of our lives. Would it witness a miracle, or would it cut the last thread of hope? Thomas stepped closer to Miriam, desperation etched into his features, the relic hovering between them like a bridge to the divine. "Please," he begged, "if there's any power in you, I beseech you. Heal her." The fervor in his voice cracked the stillness, a sudden spike of intensity that sent shivers racing down my spine. I watched him as he pressed the relic to her chest, the wood cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the warmth of her fading breath. "You can't bargain with faith, Thomas," I wanted to shout, but the words lodged in my throat, a lump of dread. The chapel held its breath, waiting for a sign, a glimmer of hope in a sea of despair. The candle flames flickered and danced, and for a heartbeat, the world felt suspended, as if reality itself paused to witness the miracle, or the tragedy, about to unfold. I remember the flicker in Thomas's eyes, a wild hope ignited, a spark fed by fear, anger, and an aching love. Was it madness to believe that a scrap of wood could wield such power? Was it faith, or folly? Miriam's body began to convulse, a seizure of life and death intertwined. I stood frozen, dread gripping my heart in a vice. A soft glow enveloped her, a radiant light that seared the shadows. Was it the divine? I could feel the chapel's walls quaking, the very stones vibrating with a primordial energy. The veil between the sacred and the profane thinned, and I could almost hear the chorus of the heavens, a haunting melody that reverberated in my bones. "Stay with me, love," Thomas cried out, tears streaming down his face. His voice broke through the cacophony, raw and urgent. "Stay with me." And then, as if the universe held its breath, a silence fell, an eerie stillness that sent chills racing up my spine. It was like the moment before thunder cracks the sky, a pregnant pause hanging in the air. The glow intensified, illuminating the chapel in a blinding white light that swallowed everything, erasing the shadows. I remember, oh, how I remember, a feeling of weightlessness, as if I floated above the chaos. Time folded in on itself, past and present colliding in a kaleidoscope of memories. I could see my own struggles reflected in Miriam's fight, my own fears manifested in her fragile body. The relic, that small piece of wood, glowed with an ethereal light, pulsing like a heartbeat, promising hope but feeding on despair. And then it was gone. The light flickered out, leaving behind a suffocating darkness that crashed over us like a tidal wave. Thomas fell to his knees, the relic slipping from his grasp, landing with a soft thud against the stone floor. I could feel the air grow heavy with sorrow, the weight of lost dreams pressing down like a leaden blanket. Miriam lay still, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, the flicker of life dimming like a candle caught in the wind. No, was all I could manage, a whisper so fragile it felt like it might shatter. No, the chapel, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb, echoes of hope now haunting spectres lurking in the corners. We were left with nothing but the cruel reality of our faith, a gaping void where miracles were meant to flourish. Time resumed its relentless march, ticking away the seconds of our despair, and I found myself grasping for anything that resembled answers, but all that met my outstretched fingers was darkness. Thomas stared at Miriam, eyes hollow, haunted by the weight of his desperation, his belief that the divine would intervene. "What do we do now?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, as if the very act of speaking could draw the attention of the heavens. I had no answers, no glimmers of hope to offer. Instead, I felt the chill of reality seep into my bones. The relic lay there, unremarkable now, a fractured promise of salvation. The air hung thick with unspoken questions, the type that claw at the soul, demanding answers from a universe that remained silent. Miracles, I realized, often come at a price. And we were left to pay it in full. The chapel walls echoed with our anguish, the shadows stretching long into the night, as we clung to the remnants of our faith, trembling in the darkness, waiting for a sign that may never come. The air crackled with a tension thicker than smoke, an uneasy silence hanging in the dimly lit chapel like a heavy shroud. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe along the walls, whispers of the past echoing in every flicker. A chill ran down my spine, an almost sentient dread, as I watched Margaret kneel before the altar, her hands clasped, knuckles white, eyes squeezed shut. They said she was cursed, that her daughter lay dying from a fever that clung to her like a thief in the night. Hope was a fragile thing, a moth flitting around the flame of desperation. I remember, Margaret breathed into the silence, her voice a thin whisper, the day she laughed. Just a fleeting memory, a laugh like silver bells, now drowned by the heavy burden of illness. She clutched at her rosary, fingers trembling over the worn beads, each one a prayer, each prayer a lifeline. "Please, Saint Agnes, let her rise," she murmured, and I could see the shadows deepen around her, as if the saint herself lingered in the room, teetering on the edge of despair and divine grace. But the air was thick with something else, something darker. I could feel it, creeping in from the corners of the chapel. The relics, fragments of saints, bones wrapped in silk, a tooth once graced by a martyr's lips, lay before her, gleaming in the flickering light, surrounded by the offerings of the desperate. Each relic a promise, a beacon of hope against the insidious tide of sickness. And yet, beneath that gleam, I sensed the weight of expectation, the raw fear of unfulfilled prayers, the agony of loss that gnawed at her spirit. Across the chapel, old Father Thomas peered through his spectacles, his brow furrowed in concern. He had seen too much suffering, felt it in his bones. "Margaret," he called softly, his voice cracking like dry earth, "the relics, they are not mere trinkets. They bear the weight of heaven's grace." But even he seemed uncertain, his faith shaken by the gnawing fear that perhaps divine intervention was merely an echo, a ghostly whisper in the wind. He knew the cost of belief, the agony of watching the sick fade before his eyes, prayers swallowed by the void. I remember, I thought, the memory swirling like a tempest, the nights when the dead came knocking. Those restless spirits, hovering between worlds, seeking solace in the prayers left unspoken. I had seen them too many times, the faces of the lost, the echoes of the damned. they haunted the dreams of the living, their cries mingling with the moans of the sick. The chapel had become a refuge, but also a battleground, a place where hope waged war against despair. As Margaret continued her fervent pleas, the feverish breath of her daughter echoed in the back of my mind. If only I could bring her here, she had whispered to me the night before, her voice a thin thread of desperation. If only the saints would hear her name. But I knew the truth, the relics were not magic. They were reminders of faith, of the stories woven through time. They offered solace, but could they cure? I watched as Margaret's faith blossomed into an almost palpable force, wrapping around her like a cloak, blinding her from the shadows that crept in. I will not lose her, she had sworn, and the weight of her promise hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, a jolt of laughter broke through the atmosphere, a child's laughter, piercing and bright, echoing through the chapel like a bell tolling at dawn. I turned, heart racing, only to find a young boy playing in the far corner, his face alight with innocence. He spun around, arms wide, a whirlwind of joy amidst the decay of hope and despair. His laughter filled the room, a stark contrast to the weighty silence, and for a moment, I dared to believe that perhaps this place still held magic. "Mother," he cried, running toward Margaret, a beam of sunlight cutting through the darkness. "Look what I found." In his tiny hands, he clutched a crumpled piece of parchment, treasures of a child's imagination. It was absurd, beautiful, and utterly heart-wrenching. In that moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath, a fragile pause before the inevitable return to sorrow. Margaret's face lit up, her despair giving way to a fleeting glimpse of joy, a reminder of life before the illness. "What is it, love?" she asked, voice trembling as she reached for him, desperate to hold on to something pure amidst the chaos. "A treasure map," he exclaimed, eyes wide with wonder. "We can find gold. We can be rich." The innocence of his dreams clashed violently with the reality that loomed over them. "Maybe the saints will help us." And just like that, the tension surged, the grief, the hope, the connection between the living and the divine. I could see it in Margaret's eyes, the dance of belief and doubt, a battle fought within her heart. "Perhaps," she breathed, and for a moment, the chapel felt alive with possibility. The relics shimmered, not just bones encased in glass, but symbols of something greater, a flicker of hope in their darkest hour. But as the boy tugged at her skirts, pleading to follow the map, the feverish cries of her daughter echoed louder, a haunting refrain woven through the tapestry of the moment. "I remember," I whispered into the thick air, "the days when laughter filled the halls, when hope wasn't a fragile thread." Margaret's face twisted with conflicting emotions, joy for her son, fear for her daughter. The weight of her love pressed on her heart, a heavy chain forged from desperation. "What do I do?" she cried out, the rawness of her plea piercing through the chapel like a dagger. The relics glinted, as if responding, the ghosts of the past beckoning her closer, urging her to believe. And in that sacred space, I felt the shadows shift, the tension crackling like electricity. Would faith conquer all? Would the relics remember her daughter? The air thickened with unanswered questions, a storm brewing on the horizon of hope and despair. The night was far from over, and in the dim light of the chapel, the battle between belief and doubt raged on, infinite and unyielding, echoing through the ages. A single candle flickered in the corner, casting shadows that danced like broken spirits across the walls. The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken, something that gnawed at the edges of reality, waiting to spill over. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat a drum echoing through the silence, urging me to acknowledge what was real, and what was not. It was an ordinary night, or so I thought, until the moment everything shifted, tilting the axis of my understanding. There was a sound, a whisper, soft yet sharp, slicing through the darkness like a knife. I turned, eyes darting toward the source, my breath hitching in my throat. And there he stood, Daniel, my brother, his face pale, eyes sunken, haunted. "They're here," he said, his voice trembling, a thin veneer over the terror lurking just beneath the surface. I wanted to dismiss him, to laugh it off as a bad joke, but the weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating. It was then that I felt it, a cold draft brushing against my skin, a chill that crept into my bones. The shadows around us thickened, wrapping themselves around Daniel, pulling him into their depths. I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his arm, but he jerked away, as if my touch burned. No. You don't understand, he yelled, eyes wide with a madness I couldn't comprehend. They want me, need me. I can't let them in. His voice cracked, and the pain in his words was palpable, a raw wound laid bare. I remember the dreams he had, those fevered nights where he spoke to figures cloaked in mist, their whispers weaving tales that tugged at his sanity. I remember the fear that blossomed in my chest when he would wake, eyes wild, gasping for breath as if he had surfaced from an ocean of nightmares. I thought it was just stress, the weight of our mother's illness, the slow decay of her mind. But this was different, this was a fracture, a rift that threatened to consume him whole. Daniel! I pleaded, my voice barely above a whisper. The shadows pulsed around him, alive and hungry. Please, come back to me. But he was lost. The brother I knew was slipping away, absorbed by something ancient and hungry. I could see it in his eyes, the battle of wills raging inside him, an unholy struggle against the forces that had laid claim to his very soul. It's too late for me, he whispered, and the word sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I can feel them inside me, time twisted, warped, as I fought to hold on to him, to tether him to this world. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake from whatever dark descent he was tumbling into, but fear coiled around my throat, choking my voice. Instead, I just stood there, impotent, feeling the world tilt further into chaos, the shadows growing bolder, reaching for him like twisted fingers. Then there was Sarah, my best friend, my anchor, standing just outside the door, peering in with wide, fearful eyes. Her presence was a thread that tethered me, yet even she was caught in the pull of the unknown. What's happening? She asked, her voice quivering, each word dipped in dread. I don't know, I confessed, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. But instinctively, I knew. The supernatural danced on the periphery, a shadowy spectre inching closer. The physical and the ethereal collided, and the boundary between them began to dissolve. Daniel, his not himself, I managed, glancing back at him, clinging to the hope that he was still there beneath the layers of darkness. Daniel! Sarah's voice pierced the air, sharp and desperate. Fight it! You're stronger than this. But the shadows had wrapped around him, coiling tighter, a vice-like grip that promised to crush everything he once was. I felt my heart crack, a slow fracture ripping its way through me as I witnessed my brother's transformation. His skin paled further, mouth twisting in a grimace that was both anguish and ecstasy. You don't understand, he cried, voice echoing against the walls, reverberating with a sense of finality. They're offering me power, freedom. My mind raced, snippets of conversations we had shared, laughter under starlit skies, the warmth of family. But beneath that warmth lay a fear, a truth that we had danced around for too long. I remembered the stories our grandmother used to tell, tales of spirits, of bodies claimed by the unseen, of battles fought not in the flesh but in the very essence of existence. Those stories had always felt distant, mere folklore. But now, they clawed at the edges of my sanity, demanding to be acknowledged. No! I screamed, the word tearing from my throat like a lifeline. You have to fight! I won't let you go! In that instant, the shadows recoiled, a collective breath held in the darkness. Daniel turned, his expression a mask of torment, yet there was a glimmer of something, recognition, perhaps. Help me, he gasped, and the plea wrenched my gut. How could I help him when I felt so powerless? I stepped forward, desperation clawing at my insides. I'm here, I'm right here. Just hold on. I reached for him again, my fingers brushing against the chill of his skin. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw the flicker of the brother I knew, the one who would steal the last piece of cake, the one who would crack a joke when everything felt heavy. But it was fleeting, like smoke dissipating in the wind. The shadows surged, enveloping him in a whirlwind of darkness. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine, a silent pact, a promise that we wouldn't let him slip away. But as we pulled him back, the world around us shuddered, a tremor of the cosmic balance shifting, as if the universe itself held its breath. Time felt elastic, stretching into an eternity as we fought against the invisible force pulling him deeper, deeper into the abyss. I could sense that the confrontation was imminent, an emotional climax that would leave us forever changed. The night thrummed with tension, the air thick with uncertainties. My heart raced, the rhythm of impending doom pounding in my ears. But what would be left of Daniel if we succeeded? What fragments of him would remain? Would we be able to reclaim him, or would we merely be left with the hollow echo of a brother who had slipped through our fingers into the dark? I held on to the hope that we could pull him back, but the shadows screamed for his surrender, and with every heartbeat, the room grew darker, heavier, alive with the weight of unfulfilled promises. As we clung to him, the world around us blurred, fading into an indistinct haze of uncertainty. The candle flickered one last time before extinguishing, plunging us into a darkness so profound it felt like a living entity, a beast ready to devour us whole. The air crackled with unspent energy, shadows curled and twisted, and the line between the supernatural and the physical began to waver once more. And in that chilling silence, we stood, two souls battling against the dark, clinging to the light that felt increasingly ephemeral. We were at the edge, the precipice of something extraordinary and terrifying, and I could only hope we were enough to pull Daniel back from the brink before he was lost for good. The air crackled with something unnameable, a tension thick enough to suffocate. Jenna stood in the dimly lit room, her breath shallow and uneven. The flickering candles cast long shadows that danced like restless spirits, whispering secrets in a language only the haunted understood. The stench of old incense clung to the walls, murky and suffocating, wrapping around her like a shroud. She could feel it, a presence, an unseen weight bearing down on her heart. "Please, just let it end," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor above the silence. Across the room, her brother Simon writhed on the floor, caught between worlds, his body arching unnaturally as if the very fabric of his being was being torn apart. Sweat dripped from his forehead, pooling into the cracks of the wooden floor, a grotesque puddle of desperation. "Help me," he screamed, the sound reverberating through the walls, a chilling echo that sent ice down Jenna's spine. She felt like a spectator, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, as shadows flickered in the corners of her vision. The priest, Father Lewis, knelt beside Simon, his voice low and steady, a lifeline in the tempest. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this body." The words rolled off his tongue like a spell, ancient and potent, yet Jenna could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Was he truly a vessel of divine will, or just a man grasping at the edges of his faith? I remember the first time it happened, she thought, memories crashing like waves, relentless and unforgiving. Simon had come home from that party, eyes glazed, laughter escaping his lips in jagged gasps. "It's just the drink," she had told herself. "He'll sleep it off." But sleep had morphed into something darker, a descent that spiraled into shadows deeper than they could fathom. The room crackled with tension, an electric hum that made her skin prickle. She could feel the weight of the unseen pressing in, a heaviness that threatened to swallow them whole. "I can't lose him," she thought, a thought both desperate and futile, clawing at her heart as she watched Simon suffer, the lines of his face twisted in agony. "Your brother is not himself," Father Lewis said, his voice steady yet strained. "Something has taken hold." The words echoed, a chilling truth that wrapped around Jenna like chains. She felt the walls closing in, a suffocating reminder of all the things left unsaid between them. Why didn't we talk more, she thought, bitter regret clawing at her. Why didn't I see? Every exhalation felt like a plea to the cosmos, an invocation to whatever forces governed their fates. Jenna's hands trembled as she reached for Simon, her fingers brushing against his clammy skin. "Come back to me," she whispered, her heart thundering against her ribcage, a wild animal desperate to break free. The air shifted, charged with an otherworldly energy. Shadows warped and twisted, their forms grotesque and mocking. "Are they watching us?" she wondered, heart racing. "Do they find joy in our suffering?" Father Lewis's voice carved through the thick silence, repeating incantations that spoke of banishment and salvation. "I command you, spirit, to leave this vessel." The words burst forth, raw and powerful, but the shadows only grew bolder, swirling around them like a tempest ready to unleash its fury. I remember the stories, Jenna thought, memories flooding her like a tide, each one more haunting than the last. Tales of ancient spirits, demons lurking in the dark, feeding on despair. She had brushed them aside as mere folklore, but now, as she watched her brother contort in torment, she felt the weight of their truth suffocating her. Is this the reality we've inherited? A world ruled by unseen forces. Simon's eyes flashed open, revealing nothing but a void, a darkness deeper than the night. "Help me!" "Get it out," he screamed, his voice a guttural mixture of terror and rage. It felt like a physical blow, sending Jenna reeling back, her hands trembling as she fought against the impending dread that threatened to consume her. The priest's voice rose, unleashing another wave of sacred words, almost pleading. "By the power of the Almighty, I command you!" And in that moment, the shadows shrank back, retreating as if stung by the light. But Jenna could feel them lurking still, their presence thick and suffocating, waiting for the moment to strike again. Is this what we've become, she thought, despair gnawing at her insides. Prisoners in our own bodies, haunted by things we cannot see. The air crackled once more, and for an instant, she glimpsed a figure in the corner, a silhouette that flickered like an old film reel, taunting her with its familiarity. A memory, or a spectre? She couldn't tell. What if it's true, she thought, horror wrapping around her throat like a vice. What if we are never truly alone? As the priest continued his invocation, Jenna felt a surge of something, hope? Desperation? She clutched Simon's hand, squeezing it tightly, anchoring them both to the fragile thread of their shared reality. "You're not alone," she whispered fiercely, a mantra against the darkness. "I'm here. Fight!" And in that moment, their eyes locked, his searching, hers pleading. It was a fragile connection, a lifeline in the storm. Let it be enough, she thought, fear coiling in her gut. Let love be enough. Yet, the shadows were not finished. They writhed and twisted, biding their time, mocking their shared defiance. Jenna could feel them, the malevolent energy coiling around her, taunting her with every heartbeat. What if this is only the beginning? Get out! Leave him! Father Lewis's voice thundered, a final, desperate plea that echoed through the room, shaking the very foundations of the darkened space. And in that moment, it was as if the world paused, teetering on the edge of chaos, a breath held in anticipation. Jenna could feel it, the energy shifting, the air thick with possibility. What if this is the moment we change everything, she thought, a flicker of hope igniting in the depths of her heart. But the shadows surged back, a roaring tide of darkness, and Jenna braced herself for the inevitable clash. We are not done, she thought fiercely, rallying her strength, knowing that this confrontation was only the beginning. The fight against the unseen was eternal, and they were merely players on a stage far grander than they could comprehend. In the heart of the storm, as the walls trembled and the shadows laughed, she realized something profound: no spirit, no demon could possess the unbreakable bond of love. And so, they fought, against the darkness, against despair, against the very essence of what it meant to be alive. Their battle was only beginning, and with every heartbeat, every breath, they would carve their existence into the void, refusing to be silenced. A woman stands in a dimly lit room, cradling her swollen belly as shadows flicker across the walls, the air thick with an ancient, unspoken tension. Outside, the world carries on, unaware of the storm brewing within her. She can feel it, a restless energy, a pulse like thunder, vibrating through her very core. It's a moment suspended in time, heavy with the weight of expectation and fear. Around her neck hangs a locket, an heirloom passed down through generations, holding the whispers of countless women who have walked this path before her. I remember the stories, she murmurs softly, her voice trembling. The tales of mothers and daughters, of blood and bone, of bodies transforming under the weight of life. Her name is Clara, and each word carries the gravity of 1,000 truths, each truth a wound unhealed. The folklore of pregnancy is a tapestry woven with fear and joy, each thread frayed and fragile. They say, as she pauses, her breath hitching, they say that if a pregnant woman looks at a rabbit, her child will be born with a hare lip. In the corner of the room, shadows coil around a figure, her sister, Lena. Striking in her defiance, Lena's dark hair frames a face marked by a mixture of resentment and sorrow. You can't believe that nonsense, Clara. It's just stories. But even as she speaks, doubt lingers in the air, intertwining with the scent of jasmine from the window, sweet yet suffocating. Lena's own body feels foreign to her, too, empty, desolate, haunted by the ghosts of lost pregnancies, memories that cling like cobwebs. Every cycle, every failed attempt gnaws at her insides, an ache that festers like a wound that never heals. Do you think I'm cursed? Clara asks, her eyes wide, sparkling with unshed tears. What if I'm not enough? What if this child is? Lena cuts her off, her voice sharp as broken glass. Enough of that. You'll be fine. We'll be fine. But the tremor in her own words belies her bravado, a shaky facade that crumbles beneath the weight of their shared history. It's as if the room itself is eavesdropping, absorbing their fears, tilting toward an unseen fate. The clock ticks, each second echoing like a heartbeat, reminding them of the inevitability of time, the relentless march toward a day that feels both distant and alarmingly close. I remember, Clara's voice drifts into silence, swallowed by the shadows. I remember the whispers of my mother when she carried me. The way she would dismiss every concern with a laugh, how she believed in the power of herbs, of charms, of the moon's alignment. Outside, the wind howls like a restless spirit, a mournful dirge that stirs memories long buried. Each gust carries tales of women who bled and cried, who found solace in rituals as old as the stars. Do you think it matters? Clara asks, desperate for an anchor. What they believed, what my mother believed. Lena's gaze softens, just for a moment. We're not them, she whispers, though the words feel like a betrayal to Clara's heart. We're in a different time. It's all just folklore. But as Clara touches her belly, she feels the truth vibrating beneath her palm, a life, a heartbeat, the pulsing reminder that magic and fear still weave through their veins. What if the law is real, she whispers, almost to herself. What if the body knows things we don't? What if curses linger in the marrow? A silence stretches, heavy and suffocating, as if the room itself holds its breath, waiting for a decision. Lena shifts uneasily, the weight of her own grief bleeding into Clara's joy. And what if it doesn't, she asks, her voice a threadbare whisper. What if it's just us, in this world, with our flawed bodies and broken hopes? The tension crackles between them, an electric charge that ignites the air. I want to believe, Clara admits, her voice a fragile song, that I can be more than my mother's fears. That I can break the cycle. Yet the fear lingers like a spectre, clawing at the edges of her resolve. I remember, she starts again, but this time the memories come rushing back, a flood of images, her mother's face, a mask of terror as she doubled over in pain, the whispers of the village women, their eyes dark with judgment. I remember the tales they told about bodies twisting, contorting, becoming vessels for life. And the darkness that followed. The stories of women who lost their way, who cursed their children because they bore the sins of their mothers. The walls pulse with the weight of those echoes, the weight of time, of lineage. What if I can't escape it? Clara's voice trembles. What if I'm destined to repeat the cycle? Lena steps closer, her arms crossing tightly over her belly, an instinctive gesture of protection. You're not cursed, she insists, though her own voice betrays a flicker of doubt. You're strong. You carry hope. But even as she speaks, the universe seems to conspire against them, the moon rising high and ominous outside, casting long shadows that dance across the floor like twisted memories. Hope, Clara breathes, savoring the word as if it were a rare treasure. But the taste is bittersweet, tainted by the reality of their lives. It feels weighty, like a stone in my throat. The clock ticks on, relentless in its pursuit of inevitability. Time is a thief, stealing moments, stealing peace, but it gives nothing in return. In the silence that follows, the air thickens with unspoken words, with dreams that hang just beyond reach. Every heartbeat is a countdown, every breath a prayer, as they stand on the precipice of something profound and terrifying. I remember, Clara whispers again, as if trying to conjure a spell, a magic that would weave the past into something beautiful, something healing. I remember the stories. They told me of women who fought against the darkness. Who found strength in their bodies, in the knowledge that creation is both a blessing and a curse. A flicker of hope ignites within her, but it is fragile, like a candle in the wind. The shadows shift, and for a moment, it feels as if the very walls are listening, holding their secrets close. What if we can rewrite the stories? Clara asks, daring to dream. What if we can take the pain and turn it into something beautiful? And as the clock ticks on, as the shadows lengthen, the air crackles with the potential of what is yet to come, a confrontation with truth, with the rawness of life, with the folklore woven into their very beings, waiting to be confronted, waiting to be understood. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the village, a banshee wail that carried the weight of 1,000 whispered fears. I stood outside the hovel, heart pounding like a drum in a funeral procession, clutching the frayed edges of a tattered shawl around my shoulders. The door creaked open, revealing the dim light of flickering candles. A heavy silence hung over the room, thick enough to choke on. Inside, Agnes lay sprawled on a straw-strewn bed, her face twisted in agony, beads of sweat tracing paths down her temples. She was not just any woman, she was the village's last hope, a vessel brimming with life but shadowed by ancient dread. "Help me, please," she gasped, as though the very air had turned to ash in her lungs. I stepped inside, the stale scent of fear and blood wrapping around me like a shroud. A flicker of light illuminated her belly, swollen and taut, but to me, it was a graveyard. What would bloom there? Life or death? I had heard the tales of spirits stealing away the souls of the unborn and of cursed children born under maleficent stars. "Hold on, Agnes. You're stronger than this," I whispered, though my own heart quaked at the uncertainty. I remembered the old wives' tales, the superstitions that had woven themselves into our lives like ivy on crumbling stone. They said that the way a mother carried her child could invite misfortune or fortune, her thoughts could shape the very essence of her offspring. What if Agnes's thoughts were steeped in fear? What if my own presence here, mere minutes away from her pain, was a harbinger of doom? She cried out again, a sound that sliced through the air and pierced my heart. I took a shaky breath, trying to anchor myself in reason, but reason felt like a fragile thread in this tempest. I glanced at the walls, where shadows danced like specters, and lingering echoes of those who had come before us whispered warnings. "Don't let the child be touched by the witching hour, don't let her look into the eyes of a black cat." What were we but puppets tangled in the strings of fate? I shivered, remembering my own mother's stories, the dry, rasping voice that recounted the tragedy of a woman who bore a child marked by the devil, an empty-eyed wretch who brought blight upon the land. "A mother's heart must be pure," she said, "or the child shall wander, lost forever." But purity was a high altar I had never reached. I was not a saint, I was a girl filled with flawed desires, haunted by dreams of escape. And yet, here I was, praying for a miracle while the darkness clawed at the edges of Agnes's life. "Tell me what you need," I managed to say, feeling both weak and fierce, a candle fighting against a tempest. Her eyes flickered with something between hope and despair, a dance of emotions that mirrored the chaos swirling around us. "The water," she rasped. "Bring me the water from the spring. They say it holds the power of life, cleanses the mother, fortifies the child." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. The spring was said to be enchanted, but also cursed, a paradox that made the villagers tremble with both reverence and fear. I had laughed at the stories, dismissed them as fanciful tales spun by scared old women. But now I felt the weight of the world crashing upon me. I could either run or confront the unknown. "I'll fetch it," I said, though my voice trembled. I turned and dashed out into the night, the moon a cold witness as I fled, feet pounding against the cobblestones. The path to the spring twisted like a serpent through the dark woods, gnarled trees looming like ancient sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. I could almost hear the whispers of spirits swirling around me, warning me to turn back, to leave the secrets buried beneath the earth. I pressed on, heart racing in rhythm with the urgency that gripped my very soul. At the spring, silver moonlight danced on the surface, creating a mirror reflecting not just my face but 1,000 fears. I knelt, cupping my hands in the cool water, feeling the chill seep into my bones. It was said that the water could hear the wishes buried deep within, that it could cleanse the darkness lurking in our hearts. I closed my eyes, letting the silence envelop me, praying for Agnes, praying for redemption. But as I stood, water spilling over my fingers like time slipping away, a low growl resonated in the shadows. My heart seized, a rabbit caught in the jaws of a beast. I turned slowly, breath hitching, and there it was, eyes glinting in the darkness, a black cat poised to pounce. The villagers whispered of omens, of doom that trailed in the wake of such a creature, and I felt the weight of their superstitions pressing down upon me. "Stay back!" I shouted, but my voice wavered. It was too late, the thought had planted itself in my mind, a seed of despair sprouting into a tree of fear. I could see Agnes's face twisted in pain, each moment stretching into eternity. The cat stalked closer, a phantom of bad luck, and all I could think of was how easily fate could turn. I felt sweat trickle down my back as I grasped the water, still dripping from my fingers, and fled back towards the village, the shadows swirling around me like a storm. When I returned, Agnes lay still, shadows dancing across her face. "I found it," I said, breathless, but the words felt hollow, echoing into a void. The air thickened, and for a moment, I dared to hope. I poured the water over her, murmuring incantations learned from my mother, each word a fragile thread in the tapestry of our lives, woven together by fear and superstition. But as the water trickled, her eyes fluttered open, and what I saw was not the light of life but the reflection of terror. "What have you brought?" she whispered, voice trembling like autumn leaves in a storm. The clock in the corner ticked loudly, a reminder that time was running out, that life and death danced a macabre waltz in this dim chamber. I felt the walls close in, shadows creeping, air thick with something unspeakable. I thought I could hear the whispers of those who paved the paths before us, their stories intertwining with our own, of mothers who lost their children, of spirits who wandered, forever seeking. I thought of the lives we carried within us, fragile and flickering, like candles in a tempest. And as I knelt beside Agnes, the weight of the past bore down upon us, and the storm outside raged with living fear, I realized this was not just about survival. This was about confronting the ghosts of our beliefs, the shadows of our doubts, and the shadows of those who had come before us. The air crackled with tension, and in that moment, I understood, we were all bound together, suspended between the terror of the unknown and the fragile hope that lingered, waiting to be born.